Welcome back, my friend. Before we start the video, I really need your support. The channel is going through a tough time and your help means everything. Let's try to reach 1,000 likes and 1,000 comments. If everyone watching leaves just one like and one comment, we can easily make it happen. Don't forget to subscribe as well. And now, let's get started. I wasn't exactly new to danger. After all, I'd been a Green Beret for nearly a decade, and this wasn't my first time in a place where something felt wrong, even if you couldn't quite put your finger on it. The year was 2005, and we were deep in a remote stretch of Alaska, tasked with investigating some unusual happenings at a military outpost. The government doesn't exactly advertise that these things happen, but when soldiers start disappearing in broad daylight and classified equipment goes missing, they send in someone like me. I'm Quentin Arliss, and the job was supposed to be a routine sweep, nothing more. If it had been just that, you wouldn't be hearing about it now. The briefing had been suspiciously light on details. Colonel Harrington had merely slid a thin folder across his desk, his face a mask of practiced indifference. 4 men stationed at Outpost 37 have gone missing in the last month, he'd said. The last communication mentioned equipment malfunction and strange noises from the lower levels. Standard procedure is to assume desertion or accident, but, I'd pressed. But this is the 3rd incident at that location in 20 years. The place should have been decommissioned after the Cold War. Someone keeps it operational for a reason. The helicopter dropped us off 10 miles from the outpost, the pilot refusing to go any closer due to atmospheric disturbances. We trudged through snow that came up to our knees, the bitter cold seeping through our thermal gear despite its military-grade protection. My team consisted of 4 men besides myself: Bennett, the communications specialist with a perpetual scowl; Morris, our weapons expert who could disassemble and reassemble any firearm blindfolded; Reeves, a medic who'd seen enough combat to make most veterans look like rookies; and Kendrick, our demolitions guy who could rig explosives with surgical precision. Then there was Russell, the intelligence officer who'd been forced upon us at the last minute. He wasn't field material, too twitchy, too academic, but he had clearance levels that surpassed even mine. Whatever was happening at Outpost 37, the brass wanted someone with access to know about it. "You're unusually quiet, Russell," I remarked as we made our way through a particularly dense patch of pines. "Care to share what's really going on here?" He adjusted his glasses, his breath visible in the frigid air. "Just following orders, Staff Sergeant. Same as you." "Bull," Bennett muttered. "Nobody sends a team like us for missing persons. What aren't you telling us?" Russell's face remained impassive. "The outpost housed sensitive equipment, that's all you need to know." The place was an abandoned Cold War installation, a long-forgotten relic buried beneath miles of dense, freezing wilderness. On the surface, it was mostly concrete bunkers and rusted-out towers, but underneath there were endless corridors that seemed to stretch on forever, most of them inaccessible after decades of neglect. That's where the real concern was. Something was happening down there, and we were sent to find out what. I remember thinking, as we approached the outpost, how desolate it looked. A few decrepit buildings still stood, though they sagged under the weight of years of snow and neglect. And then there were the footprints, or rather the lack of them. It was winter, and the snow had recently fallen, but it was like the place had been abandoned for ages. That didn't make sense, given that soldiers had been stationed there just a few weeks before. There should have been tracks, signs of life, but there was nothing, not a single print. "This doesn't add up," Morris said, voicing what we were all thinking. "If there were men stationed here 2 weeks ago, where are the footprints? The snow's fresh, but not that fresh." Russell pulled out a device that looked like a modified radar gun. "I'm picking up heat signatures from inside the main building. Faint, but present." "Human?" I asked. He frowned. "Inconclusive." We approached the main entrance, a heavy steel door that should have been locked but hung slightly ajar, creaking softly in the wind. Above it, the faded insignia of some long-defunct military project was barely visible through the frost. "Welcome to Outpost 37, I muttered, shouldering my rifle. "Let's see what's worth dying for out here in the middle of nowhere." The door opened with a groan that echoed through the empty corridors, a sound that seemed to bounce back at us from depths we couldn't see. The darkness inside was almost complete, swallowing the beams of our flashlights after just a few feet. "Power should be on," Russell said, consulting his tablet. "Emergency generators at minimum." Kendrick found the main switch panel, its cover hanging loose. "Wiring's been chewed through. Something's been at it." "Animals?" Reeves suggested. I examined the damage. The cuts were too precise, too deliberate. No animal I've ever seen. We rigged up temporary lighting using our field kits, casting long shadows down the hallways. The place was a maze of corridors and rooms, most of them empty save for rusted filing cabinets and desks covered in a thick layer of dust. Yet some areas looked recently disturbed, as if someone or something had been moving through the complex. According to the schematics, Russell said, tracing a path on his tablet, The main research facility is 2 levels down. That's where the missing personnel were last stationed. Research facility? I questioned. I thought this was an observation post. Russell didn't meet my eyes. It was, among other things. The stairwell leading down was pitch black, our flashlight beams seeming to get swallowed by the darkness rather than penetrate it. The air grew noticeably colder as we descended, carrying a strange smell like ozone and something else I couldn't quite place. I don't like this, Morris whispered, his hand tight around his weapon. Something's off. I nodded. 20 years in the field gives you a sixth sense for danger, and right now every instinct I had was screaming at me to turn back. But orders were orders, and whatever was down there, we needed to find it. Stay alert, I said, taking point as we reached the bottom of the stairs. And watch each other's backs. Little did I know that within hours not all of us would be coming back up those stairs alive. The second level of the outpost was in better condition than the first, cleaner, with fewer signs of decay. The lights actually worked here, flickering on automatically as we moved through the hallways. It was as if this part of the facility had been maintained while the upper level was allowed to rot. Why keep the lower levels operational? Bennett asked, echoing my thoughts. Seems like a waste of resources for an abandoned outpost. Russell moved ahead, his attention fixed on a series of readings from his device. The facility was officially decommissioned in 1991, but certain projects remained active. Limited personnel, minimal oversight. What kind of projects? I pressed. The classified kind, he replied, not looking up. The hallway opened into what appeared to be a control room. Banks of computers and monitoring equipment arranged in concentric circles around a central platform. Most of the screens were dark, but a few still glowed with text and data scrolling too fast to read. Someone's been here recently, Reeves noted, running a finger along one of the consoles. No dust. Morris moved to one of the active monitors, squinting at the display. These are system logs. Last entry was 13 days ago. I leaned over his shoulder to look. The entry was brief. Anomalous readings from Sector 7. Requesting backup from main facility. No response. The rest was corrupted. Digital garbage that made no sense. What's in Sector 7? I asked Russell. He consulted his tablet, brow furrowing. It's not on the official schematics. Must be part of the classified section. So we have missing personnel, mysterious readings, and a secret area not on the maps, Kendrick summarized. Just another day in paradise. We continued our exploration, moving through laboratories and storage rooms filled with equipment I didn't recognize. The technology looked advanced, far beyond what should have been available during the Cold War era. In one room we found what appeared to be medical facilities. Surgical tables with restraints, monitoring equipment, and walls lined with containers of preserved specimens. They looked like tissue samples but distorted, wrong somehow. These are human, Reeves said quietly, examining one of the containers. But the cellular structure is altered. I've never seen anything like it. Russell was suddenly at his side, taking the container from his hands. These are classified materials. Don't touch anything else. The tension in the room thickened. There was clearly more going on here than a simple search and rescue operation. Time to level with us, Russell, I said, my patience wearing thin. What exactly happened here? What were they working on? He hesitated, then sighed. In the 1980s, this facility was part of a program studying anomalous signals detected in the region. They believed they were intercepting transmissions of non-terrestrial origin. You're saying they were hunting aliens? Bennett scoffed. I'm saying they detected signals they couldn't explain, Russell corrected. The program evolved from passive monitoring to active research. That's all I'm cleared to tell you. And the missing personnel? I pushed. We're here to retrieve data and specimens after unexpected activity was detected last month. They reported finding evidence that the original research team had discovered something. Then they stopped reporting in. A crash from the next room cut our conversation short. We moved instantly into defensive positions, weapons raised. The sound had come from behind a heavy door marked cold storage, authorized personnel only. I nodded to Kendrick, who positioned himself to breach the door while the rest of us prepared to enter. On my signal, he hit the release and we swept in, flashlights and gun barrels sweeping the darkness. The cold storage room was vast, lined with cylindrical tanks that reached from floor to ceiling. Most were empty, their glass fronts cracked or shattered, but a few still contained murky liquid. Something had clearly broken out of or into several of the tanks, leaving behind twisted metal and broken glass. What the hell were they keeping in these? Morris whispered, his breath visible in the freezing air. I approached one of the intact tanks, wiping condensation from its surface to peer inside. What I saw made me step back involuntarily. Floating in the preservation fluid was what appeared to be a human form, but twisted, changed. The limbs were elongated, jointed in places where no joints should be. The skin was pale, almost translucent, stretched too tight over a frame that wasn't quite human. Was that a person? Reeves asked, his professional detachment slipping. Before Russell could answer, a skittering sound echoed through the room like nails on metal, but faster, more chaotic. We froze, listening. It seemed to come from above, then behind, then all around us. Movement at your 3 o'clock, Bennett hissed, his rifle tracking something I couldn't see. A shadow darted between the tanks, too fast to follow. Then another, on the opposite side of the room. We were surrounded. Fall back to the door, I ordered, keeping my voice steady. Slow and tight. We began to retreat, moving as a unit, backs to each other. The skittering grew louder, more frenzied, as if excited by our movement. That's when we saw the first body. It was wedged between 2 of the broken tanks, almost hidden in the shadows. What remained of the uniform identified it as one of the missing soldiers, but the body itself was barely recognizable as human. It had been torn apart, not by bullets or explosives, but by something with immense strength and precision. The wounds weren't ragged but clean, surgical almost, as if something had been methodically taking the body apart to see how it worked. Russell was fumbling with his equipment, trying to pick up the source of the last transmission when we heard another sound. It was faint, just a rustle, like something scraping across the floor. We all froze. The others looked at me for direction, but I didn't have to tell them what to do. We were trained to react instantly, and our weapons were ready. The sound grew louder, but it didn't come from any particular direction. It was all around us, echoing through the long, narrow corridors. Russell whispered something about it being impossible, but I was too focused to pay attention. The scraping stopped, and in its place there was a kind of clicking noise, irregular and too mechanical to be an animal, but too organic to be machinery. We need to move, I said quietly. Now. As if in response, the lights in the cold storage room went out, plunging us into darkness, save for our flashlights. In the sudden blackness, the clicking sounds multiplied, coming from every direction at once. Move, I shouted, abandoning stealth for speed. Back to the control room. We ran. The sounds pursuing us through the darkness. Something brushed against my leg as I ran. Something cold and rough that moved too quickly to see. Kendrick screamed from somewhere behind me. The sound cut short by a wet, gurgling noise. Kendrick, Reeves called, turning back. Keep moving, I ordered, grabbing his arm. We can't help him if we're dead. We made it back to the control room, sealing the heavy door behind us. Bennett was bleeding from a cut on his arm, 4 parallel slashes that went straight through his tactical gear. What the hell was that? He panted, as Reeves applied pressure to the wound. Not what, Russell said, his face pale as he stared at his tablet. How many? Before I could ask what he meant, the tablet screen filled with images from security cameras we hadn't noticed before. They showed the corridors we'd just fled through, now crawling with movement. Dark skeletal figures moved with unnatural speed, some on all fours, others contorting themselves through spaces too small for their frames. They weren't heading toward us. They were heading deeper into the facility. They're going to Sector 7, Russell whispered. They know we're here. They're preparing. Preparing what? Morris demanded. Russell looked up, his eyes hollow with fear. The transmission. They're going to send another transmission. Bennett told me to pull out, but that wasn't an option. Not with Kendrick unaccounted for and whatever those things were moving deeper into the facility. If they were heading to this mysterious Sector 7, that's where we needed to go too. Russell, I said firmly, no more half-truths. What exactly are we dealing with here? He hesitated, then set his tablet down, revealing a classified file that shouldn't have been in our possession. In 1983, researchers at this facility detected a signal coming from what they believed was deep space. They managed to isolate and record it, but when they played it back for analysis, something happened. What kind of something? Morris pressed. The researchers exposed to the full signal experienced rapid physiological changes. Their cellular structure began to alter, their DNA rewriting itself. Most died within hours, their bodies rejecting the changes, but a few survived longer, changing into something else. The program was officially terminated, the survivors contained, and the whole incident buried. Those things we saw, they're the survivors? From the 80s? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Russell shook his head. No, those would have died decades ago. These are new. Someone reactivated the research recently, possibly using the original samples. The team sent in last month must have been exposed. Reeves finished bandaging Bennett's arm. So what's in Sector 7? The original transmission equipment, Russell said quietly. And if my theory is correct, they're trying to boost the signal, send it somewhere, or to someone. The implications hung in the air between us. Whatever these things were, whatever they had once been, they weren't just mindless mutations. They had purpose, direction. We need to destroy that equipment, I decided. And then get the hell out of here. "And Kendrick?" Bennett asked. I met his eyes steadily. "We look for him on the way, but the mission comes first." Russell pulled up schematics on his tablet revealing hidden passages not on the official maps. "Sector 7 is here, at the lowest level. There's an access point through the maintenance tunnels that might bypass wherever those things are gathering." We gathered what supplies we had, including extra ammunition and the few explosives we'd brought with us. Reeves distributed emergency medical kits, small but comprehensive packages that included powerful painkillers and stimulants, just in case, he said grimly. We moved carefully through the facility, following Russell's directions to a service elevator hidden behind a false wall in one of the storage rooms. It was barely operational, the mechanisms groaning in protest as we descended to the lowest level. The air changed as we went deeper, becoming thicker, humid, carrying that same strange smell I'd noticed earlier, but stronger now. The walls of the corridor were different too, covered in a thin film of moisture that glistened under our flashlights. "The temperature's rising," Reeves noted, checking a thermometer on his gear. "We're 10 degrees warmer than the level above. Should be getting colder the deeper we go," Morris said. "Not warmer." The maintenance tunnel narrowed as we progressed, forcing us to proceed in single file. The walls were close enough to touch on either side, and in some places we had to crouch to continue forward. The sensation of being buried alive prickled at the back of my neck, but I pushed it down. Focus on the mission. We'd been moving for about 20 minutes when we heard it, a low pulsing hum that vibrated through the metal around us. It wasn't mechanical, it wavered and fluctuated in patterns too irregular for machinery. "That's it," Russell whispered. "The signal, they've already started." The tunnel eventually opened into a larger space, a junction where several passages converged. The humming was louder here, coming from a passage directly ahead. But that wasn't what stopped us in our tracks. The walls were covered in a strange web-like growth that pulsed with faint bioluminescence. It spread across the ceiling and floor, thicker in some places than others, forming patterns that seemed almost deliberate like circuit boards or neural networks. "Don't touch it," Russell warned. "The growth is a physical manifestation of the signal. Direct contact could trigger transformation." As if to emphasize his point, we noticed shapes embedded in the thicker sections of the growth. Human shapes partially absorbed into the web-like structure. Their features were distorted, mouths frozen in silent screams, limbs elongated and fused with the growth around them. "Jesus," Morris breathed, then caught himself. "Sorry." I recognized one of the faces, or what was left of it. "That's Kendrick." His body was half absorbed into the wall, one arm still free but transformed, the fingers unnaturally long and jointed. His eyes were open but clouded over, unseeing. "Is he?" Bennett couldn't finish the question. Russell shook his head. "He's part of it now. They all are." The humming intensified, pulsing through the air around us. With each wave, the growth on the walls seemed to expand slightly, reaching further along the tunnels. "It's spreading," I realized. "The signal is strengthening the growth, and the growth is amplifying the signal. It's a feedback loop." "We need to move," Russell urged. "Sector 7 is just ahead. We need to destroy the transmission equipment before the signal reaches full strength." We pressed forward, careful not to touch the walls. The passage leading to Sector 7 was almost completely overtaken by the growth, leaving only a narrow path down the center. The humming had become a physical presence, pressing against our ears and vibrating through our bodies. The door to Sector 7 was massive, a reinforced blast door designed to contain whatever was inside. It stood partially open, a gap just wide enough for a person to slip through. Beyond it, bright light pulsed in rhythm with the humming. "Charges on the transmission equipment," I ordered Morris. "We blow it and get out, quick and clean." He nodded, readying the explosives we'd brought. Bennett and Reeves positioned themselves to provide cover, while Russell hovered near the door, his eyes fixed on his tablet as he monitored the signal strength. "It's spiking," he warned. "Whatever they're doing in there, they're reaching some kind of crescendo." I peered through the gap in the door. The room beyond was vast, its walls entirely covered in the luminescent growth. In the center stood what appeared to be the source of the light, a column of energy that stretched from floor to ceiling, pulsing with colors that hurt to look at directly. Around the column, the creatures moved in a strange, synchronized dance. There were dozens of them, their elongated bodies weaving in and out of the light. They weren't random mutations as I'd first thought, but precisely engineered forms. Some had multiple limbs that ended in delicate tool-like appendages. Others had what looked like specialized sensory organs protruding from their torsos. And at the base of the column, partially emerged from the growth on the floor, was something else, larger than the others, its form more fully transformed. It barely resembled anything human, its body a complex arrangement of limbs and sensory organs wrapped around a central mass. It seemed to be directing the others, its movements dictating the rhythm of their dance. "That's the primary receiver," Russell whispered, pointing to the large creature. It's channeling the signal through itself, directing the others to amplify and transmit. Can we kill it? I asked. Destroy the equipment, he replied. The column is the transmitter. Without it, the signal can't propagate. We found it at the entrance to one of the sealed-off underground tunnels. The door was half open despite the fact that it should have been locked tight. Inside, the light flickered, casting long shadows across the floor. That's when we saw it. At first glance, it looked like a pile of bones, old and weathered, but then I realized the bones were fresh, too fresh, and they weren't animal bones. Russell backed up fast, muttering under his breath. I stepped forward, reaching down to inspect the remains. There was something strange about the way they were scattered, almost as if they had been arranged. That's when the stench hit me. It was sharp, metallic, like blood mixed with rust. Morris was the first to notice the movement. I barely had time to register his shout before something shot out of the shadows. It was fast, too fast. Morris went down hard, his body dragged into the darkness before anyone could react. I've seen a lot in my time, but nothing moved like that, and I wasn't about to let another one of my team get taken. I ordered the rest of us to fall back, but the thing didn't give us a chance. It came at us again, this time from the ceiling, dropping down with a sickening thud. We opened fire, but it was like shooting at smoke. It darted through the bullets, a blur of movement in sharp angles. That's when I got my first good look at it. It was big, at least 7 feet tall when it stood up, but it was hunched over, its back arched like a spider. Its limbs were long, too long, and twisted at odd angles. It had skin, or something close to it, but it was stretched too tight over its bones, making it look like it had been pulled from some ancient tomb. And its mouth, if you could call it that, was filled with rows of jagged, crooked teeth. It moved like a snake, slithering over the ground in a way that didn't make sense for something so large. I didn't know what it was, and I wasn't about to stick around and find out. Russell was useless at that point, mumbling about how it couldn't be real, how none of this made sense. He was right, but now wasn't the time for existential breakdowns. We needed to get out fast. Morris was gone, and I wasn't about to lose anyone else. We fell back, firing at the thing to keep it at bay. It seemed to be toying with us, letting us think we had a chance. We barely made it to the entrance when I felt something grab my leg. I went down hard, smashing my knee against the concrete. I looked back, and there it was, dragging itself toward me. Its long fingers curled around my boot. I kicked at it, but its grip was like iron. I fired point blank into its face. The thing screamed, a horrible bone-rattling noise that made my head spin, but it let go. We didn't stop running until we were back outside, the cold air slapping us awake. Russell collapsed in the snow, gasping for breath. I looked around, expecting it to follow us, but the thing stayed inside. It didn't come after us. That's when I noticed the second set of footprints. They weren't ours, and they weren't human. They led away from the outpost, heading deep into the woods, like the thing had friends out there waiting for us to come to them. I wasn't about to give it that chance. We need to go back in, I said after we'd caught our breath. The statement hung in the frigid air between us, drawing looks of disbelief from Bennett and Reeves. You saw what happened to Morris, Bennett protested, and Kendrick. We're outmatched. And outgunned, Reeves added. Our weapons barely slowed that thing down. Russell had recovered somewhat, though his face remained pale. The staff sergeant is right. If we don't destroy the transmission equipment, whatever signal they're sending will only grow stronger. It could spread beyond the facility. How far? I asked. Theoretically, unlimited range. The original signal came from deep space. There's no reason to think the response wouldn't reach just as far. The implications sank in. This wasn't just about a few missing soldiers anymore, or even about what happened to Morris and Kendrick. If that signal reached its destination, whatever had happened here could happen elsewhere, perhaps everywhere. We go back, I decided. But not the same way. Russell, you said the original transmission equipment is in Sector 7. Is there another way to access it? He consulted his tablet, fingers trembling slightly as he navigated through the classified schematics. There's a ventilation system that runs throughout the lower levels. It connects to Sector 7 from the east side of the facility. It would be tight but passable. And the explosives? I looked to Bennett, who had taken charge of our demolition gear after Kendrick was lost. We've got enough to bring down the whole sector if we place them right, he confirmed. But we'd need to get close to the core of whatever's generating that signal. I nodded, formulating a plan. We use the ventilation system to bypass the main corridors where those things are patrolling. Get as close as possible to the transmission equipment. Plant the charges and get out. Quick and clean. Those vents will be a kill box if they find us, Reeves pointed out. No room to maneuver, no way to retreat. Then we make sure they don't find us, I said simply. Russell, how much time do we have before that signal reaches full strength? He checked his readings. Based on the energy fluctuations I detected earlier, I'd estimate less than 2 hours. Then we move. Now, gear check. Weapons, ammo, explosives. Leave behind anything that might slow you down or make noise. We strip down to essential equipment, distributing the explosives between Bennett and me as a precaution. Reeves packed light medical supplies, focusing on items that might counteract whatever transformative effects the signal had on human physiology. Russell kept only his tablet and a small case of specialized equipment I didn't recognize. "What's that?" I asked, nodding to the case. "Signal jammers," he replied. "Short range, but they might disrupt the creature's ability to communicate with each other. They operate on a hive mind of sorts. The primary receiver coordinates their actions through subsonic frequencies. Why didn't you mention this earlier?" "Because using them puts us at risk too. The jammers don't discriminate. They'll affect any technology in range, including our comms. And there's a chance they might agitate the creatures rather than disrupt them." "A chance we'll have to take," I decided. "We use them only when necessary, and only for short bursts." We re-entered the facility through a maintenance hatch Russell identified from his schematics, bypassing the main entrance where we'd first encountered the creatures. The access led to a utility corridor that smelled of mildew and rust, its walls lined with pipes and electrical conduits. "Ventilation access is 50 meters ahead," Russell whispered, leading the way. "The shafts are maintenance-sized on this level, but they narrow as they approach Sector 7. The access panel to the ventilation system was partially corroded, its edges crusted with the same strange growth we'd seen in the lower levels, though much less developed here. It took both Bennett and me to pry it open, the metal groaning in protest. The shaft beyond was dark and cramped, barely wide enough for a man to crawl through. A faint breeze carried that now familiar smell, metallic and organic at the same time, like ozone mixed with decay. "I'll take point," I said, shouldering my rifle and preparing to enter the shaft. "Russell, you're next with the tablet. Guide us through this maze. Bennett, then Reeves. Keep it quiet." The ventilation system was a nightmare of tight turns and junctions, the metal walls pressing in from all sides. Our progress was painfully slow, each movement calculated to minimize noise. The further we went, the warmer it became, the air growing thick with moisture that condensed on the shaft walls. And with the heat came the growth. Thin at first, just traces along the seams of the metal, but thickening as we descended. In some places it pulsed with that same bioluminescence we'd seen earlier, casting an eerie blue light through the shafts. "We're approaching the third level," Russell whispered, his voice barely audible over the increasing hum that vibrated through the metal around us. "Sector 7 is directly below us now." I paused at a junction, peering down a vertical shaft that seemed to drop into darkness. "Is that our route?" Russell nodded. "It leads to a maintenance room adjacent to Sector 7. From there we can access the main chamber without crossing the areas where the creatures were concentrated." The descent was treacherous, the handholds slick with moisture and growth. Twice I nearly lost my grip, saved only by years of training and raw instinct. Below me I could hear the others struggling similarly, their breathing heavy in the confined space. The shaft ended at another access panel, this one heavily overgrown with the luminescent material. It bulged inward as if something were pressing against it from the other side, pulsing in rhythm with the now deafening hum. "We need to break through," I said, drawing my combat knife. "But be ready. No telling what's waiting on the other side." I scraped at the growth, trying to clear the edges of the panel. The material was surprisingly resilient, more like cartilage than plant matter, and it seemed to recoil from the blade. When I finally managed to pry the panel loose, a rush of hot, fetid air burst into the shaft, carrying with it a chorus of those clicking sounds we'd heard earlier. The maintenance room beyond was unrecognizable, completely transformed by the growth. It covered every surface, thicker here than anywhere we'd seen before, forming complex structures that resembled organic machinery. Pulsing veins of bioluminescence ran through it, all converging toward a doorway on the far side of the room. "Sector 7 is through there," Russell whispered. "The primary transmission equipment will be in the center of the chamber." We climbed down from the shaft cautiously, avoiding contact with the growth as much as possible. The floor yielded slightly underfoot, like walking on living tissue rather than concrete and metal. "How much of this stuff is there?" Bennett asked, disgust evident in his voice. "It's spread throughout the lower levels," Russell replied, "growing exponentially as the signal strengthens. At this rate, it will encompass the entire facility within days. Charges here would be ineffective," I noted, surveying the room. "We need to hit the source directly." We approached the doorway, moving as silently as possible despite the yielding floor. Beyond it lay Sector 7 proper, a vast chamber that had once been filled with research equipment but was now almost entirely transformed. The central column of energy I'd glimpsed earlier now dominated the space, a pillar of shifting light that stretched from floor to ceiling. Around it the creatures moved in their strange synchronized patterns, more numerous than before. Dozens of the transformed beings, their elongated limbs and distorted bodies weaving through the light in what almost resembled worship. And at the base of the column, partially merged with the growth, was the primary receiver, the largest of the creatures. Its body a complex arrangement of sensory organs and limbs. It pulsed in time with the column, its movements directing the others. The transmission equipment, Russell whispered, pointing to a series of structures embedded in the growth near the column. It's been absorbed, integrated into their biology, but the core components are still there. That's what we need to destroy. How close do we need to get? Bennett asked, readying the explosives. Within 20 meters for maximum effect, Russell calculated. Any further and the growth might absorb enough of the blast to protect the essential components. I surveyed the chamber, noting the patterns of movement among the creatures. They seemed focused on the column, their attention directed inward. If we stayed along the periphery of the room, using the growth as cover, we might be able to approach close enough to plant the charges undetected. We move along the east wall, I decided. Bennett, prepare 3 charges. Primary target is that equipment cluster. Russell, stand by with the jammers in case we're spotted. Reeves, cover our 6. If anything comes at us from behind, take it down quietly if possible. We began our approach, staying low and using the uneven terrain created by the growth to mask our movements. The creatures remained focused on their ritual, seemingly unaware of our presence. The hum of the transmission grew louder as we neared the column, pressing against our skulls with almost physical force. We were 30 meters from the target when one of the creatures suddenly broke from the group, its elongated head swiveling in our direction. It paused as if scenting the air, then began moving toward our position with that unnatural fluid motion. It knows we're here, Bennett whispered, his hand moving to his weapon. Hold, I ordered. No noise unless absolutely necessary. The creature drew closer, its body weaving through the growth with disturbing ease. It was one of the smaller ones, its form less fully transformed than others, with vestiges of human features still visible beneath the changes. As it approached, I realized with a shock that I recognized the distorted face. It was Morris, or what had once been Morris. His eyes were now milky white, unseeing in the conventional sense, but clearly perceiving something. The lower half of his face had split into mandible-like structures that clicked rhythmically as he moved. His body had elongated, joints rearranged, skin stretched and pale. He paused just meters from our position, head tilting as if listening. For a moment I thought he might retain some fragment of his former self, some recognition of his team. Then he screamed, a high, piercing sound that cut through the hum of the transmission like a knife. Now, I shouted, abandoning stealth as the other creatures turned toward us, alerted by Morris's cry. Russell, jammers. Russell activated his devices, throwing them toward different parts of the chamber. They flared to life with a pulse of energy that disrupted the rhythm of the hymn. The effect on the creatures was immediate. They staggered, movements becoming uncoordinated and erratic. We sprinted toward the equipment cluster, firing at any creature that came too close. The bullets seemed more effective now, the jammers apparently weakening whatever force made them so resilient before. Cover me, Bennett shouted, dropping to one knee as he reached the target area. He worked quickly, attaching the explosive charges to what remained of the original equipment embedded in the growth. The primary receiver at the base of the column was writhing in apparent agony, its many limbs thrashing as the jammers disrupted its connection to the others. But even as we watched, it began to adapt, its movements becoming more purposeful again. The jammers are losing effectiveness, Russell warned. We have minutes at most. Charges set, Bennett called. Remote detonator ready. Fall back to the maintenance room, I ordered. Move. We retreated as the creatures began to recover, their movements regaining that fluid, coordinated quality. The one that had been Morris was in pursuit, leading several others in our direction. They were faster than us, gaining ground with each passing second. Use the second jammer, I shouted to Russell. He activated another device, tossing it behind us. It bought us precious seconds as the creatures recoiled from its effects, allowing us to reach the maintenance room. Back into the shaft, I directed, helping Reeves up first, Russell, then Bennett. As they climbed, I held position at the doorway, firing controlled bursts at the advancing creatures. They were moving more cautiously now, spreading out to surround our position rather than rushing in directly. Staff Sergeant, come on, Bennett called from the shaft. I backed toward the access point, keeping my weapon trained on the doorway. The creatures had paused just beyond the threshold, as if reluctant to enter. The Morris thing was at their center, its head tilted in that strange, evaluating angle. For a brief moment, our eyes met, his milky white, mine wide with adrenaline, and in that instant, I saw something flicker across what remained of his face. Recognition, perhaps, or something else entirely. Then I was in the shaft, pulling the access panel closed behind me. Go, up fast as you can. We climbed frantically, the sounds of pursuit echoing through the shaft below us. Claws or something like them scraped against metal, the creatures forcing their way into the ventilation system. How far to the exit? I gasped to Russell. 200 meters, he replied. First junction, then right. Straight to the utility corridor. Bennett, the detonator. He fumbled in his pocket, producing the remote trigger for the explosives. Ready. Wait until we reach the junction, I ordered. We need more distance. The shaft seemed endless, each meter a struggle against gravity and fatigue. Behind us, the sounds of pursuit grew louder, punctuated by that clicking communication. They were gaining on us, their transformed bodies better adapted to the confined space than our human frames. Finally, we reached the junction, turning right toward the exit as Russell had directed. Now, I shouted to Bennett. He pressed the detonator. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the world seemed to buckle around us. The explosion ripped through the facility beneath us, the shockwave traveling up through the ventilation system like a solid wall of force. The shaft bucked and twisted, metal shrieking as welds tore free. We were thrown against the walls, tumbling through the suddenly unstable passage. Behind us, the creatures screamed, not in pain but in something that sounded disturbingly like triumph. Then the screams were cut short as the shaft behind us collapsed inward, crushed by structural failures cascading through the facility. We crawled desperately toward the exit, the ventilation system crumbling around us. Ahead, I could see light, the utility corridor, our way out. Move, I urged, pushing Reeves ahead of me as a section of shaft behind us gave way. We spilled out into the corridor in a tangle of limbs and equipment, scrambling to our feet as the entire wall shuddered. Cracks raced across the concrete, spreading like lightning from floor to ceiling. The whole place is coming down, Bennett realized. We need to get topside. We ran through the buckling corridors, dodging falling debris and equipment. The growth that had spread through the lower levels was reacting to the destruction, writhing and pulsing with agitated light. In some places it seemed to be trying to shore up failing structures, forming tendrils that stretched across gaps in the concrete. The stairwell to the surface was partially blocked by fallen ceiling panels, forcing us to climb over precariously balanced debris. Above us, emergency lights flashed warnings, the facility's automated systems finally responding to the catastrophic damage. When we reached the main level, the destruction was less severe but still spreading. Behind us, the central building collapsed inward with a roar of concrete and metal, dust billowing into the frigid Alaskan air. The outlying structures followed, one by one, as the foundations beneath them gave way. We watched from a safe distance as the facility was reduced to rubble, the snow around it darkening with dust and debris. For several minutes, no one spoke, our breath forming clouds in the cold air. Did we stop it? Bennett finally asked. The transmission? Russell was checking his tablet, which had somehow survived the escape. Energy readings are falling rapidly. The primary equipment was destroyed. He looked up, his expression still troubled. But the signal was active for nearly an hour before we intervened, long enough to reach its destination. And what happens now? Reeves asked. I didn't have an answer. None of us did. I wasn't about to give them the chance to find us. We radioed for extraction, but by the time help arrived, it was too late for Morris. His body, or what was left of it, was found inside the bunker, torn apart like something had used him for practice. The rescue team arrived 3 hours after our call, a Black Hawk helicopter appearing over the horizon like a mirage. They brought medical personnel, additional security forces, and a team of specialists in hazmat suits who immediately cordoned off the ruins of the outpost. We were separated upon arrival at the nearest military base, each taken to isolated quarters for medical observation. The debriefings began immediately, endless hours of questions from stern-faced officers and civilian specialists whose credentials were never shared. They wanted to know everything, what we'd seen, what we'd heard, what we'd touched. They were particularly interested in any physical contact with the growth or the creatures, scrutinizing every scratch and bruise as if looking for signs of transformation. Russell wasn't among the questioners. In fact, I didn't see him again after we were separated. When I asked about him, I was told he was assisting with containment procedures, whatever that meant. Bennett and Reeves were similarly isolated. During one brief encounter in a corridor between debriefings, Bennett managed to whisper that they'd been running blood tests on him hourly, looking for something they wouldn't specify. He looked haggard, his eyes sunken, the wound on his arm bandaged but clearly still painful. They know more than they're telling us, he murmured before we were ushered away from each other. This isn't the first time this has happened. After 3 days of isolation and questioning, I was finally brought before Colonel Harrington, the man who had assigned us the mission in the first place. He looked older than I remembered, his face etched with new lines of worry. Sit down, Staff Sergeant, he said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. I believe it's time we had a frank discussion. About what happened at Outpost 37, sir? I asked, taking the seat. About what happens next? He slid a folder across the desk, different from the one he'd given me before the mission, thicker and marked with classification levels I'd never seen before. The official report on the incident. I opened it cautiously. The document inside was heavily redacted, black lines obscuring most of the text. What remained was a clinical account of a containment failure resulting in the loss of research materials and the deaths of several personnel due to environmental hazards. No mention of the creatures. No mention of the transmission. No mention of Morris or Kendrick being transformed rather than simply killed. "This is bull, sir," I said, closing the folder. "This isn't what happened." "It's what happened officially," Harrington replied, his tone leaving no room for argument. "And it's what you'll confirm happened if asked." "And if I don't?" He sighed, suddenly looking very tired. "Quentin, I've known you for a long time. You're one of my best. But what happened at Outpost 37 goes beyond you, beyond me, beyond even the military. Some things are classified not because they're secret, but because people couldn't handle knowing them. People deserve to know if we're not alone," I countered. "If something out there is trying, do they?" He leaned forward. "What would happen if word got out that an alien signal can transform humans into something else? The panic, the chaos." He shook his head. "And that's assuming it's alien at all. We don't know what it is. Not really. The original researchers thought it came from space, but others believed it might have emerged from somewhere much closer, perhaps from within the Earth itself, from depths we've never explored." I remembered the creatures' movements, their behavior, how they seemed to be conducting some kind of ritual around that column of energy. They were sending a signal back, I realized, calling to whatever sent the original transmission. Harrington nodded slightly. "That's one theory. Another is that they were simply trying to spread, broadcasting the same signal that changed them to affect others elsewhere." "And did they succeed?" I asked, dreading the answer. "Before we destroyed the equipment?" He was silent for a long moment. "We don't know. No similar incidents have been reported, but..." He trailed off, leaving the implication hanging between us. "But it could take time," I finished for him. "Days, weeks, months before anything happens, if it happens." "Precisely." He closed the folder, reclaiming it from my side of the desk. "Which is why we maintain monitoring stations around the globe, why we keep facilities like Outpost 37 operational despite official decommissioning. We listen, we watch, and when necessary, we contain." "And the others?" I asked. "Bennett, Reeves? They'll be released back to active duty shortly, with appropriate reassignments. Far from Alaska." He gave me a meaningful look. "As will you." "And Russell?" Something flickered across Harrington's face, discomfort perhaps, or concern. "Intelligence Officer Russell has returned to his regular duties." It was a non-answer, and we both knew it. "Sir, with all due respect, we deserve to know if we're at risk, if what happened to Morris and Kendrick could happen to us." Harrington hesitated, then nodded slightly. "The medical evaluations show no signs of unusual physiological changes in you or the other survivors. The transformation appears to require either direct exposure to the original signal or prolonged contact with the growth it generates. You had neither. And the growth itself, the ruins of the outpost, being handled appropriately." Another non-answer. "The site has been completely quarantined, and what remains is being systematically sterilized." I wanted to believe him, but the memory of those second set of footprints in the snow lingered. They'd led away from the outpost into the wilderness. At least one of the creatures had left before we arrived, perhaps more. "The official report will state that you and your team encountered a toxic chemical leak resulting from old Soviet experiments," Harrington continued. "That you heroically managed to prevent its spread by triggering a controlled demolition of the facility, but tragically lost 2 men in the process." He met my eyes steadily. "Your commendations are being processed. You'll receive the Silver Star for your actions." "For a lie," I said quietly. "For saving lives," he corrected. "Perhaps more than you know." I was dismissed shortly after, given 2 weeks leave before my new assignment. A training post at Fort Bragg, about as far from Alaska as the military could send me while keeping me in the continental United States. Bennett and Reeves received similar reassignments, each to different locations. We were being separated, our shared experience buried along with the truth about Outpost 37. The official report said Morris died in an accident. That's how they always explain it, just another casualty of a training exercise gone wrong, but we knew better. A few days later, Russell disappeared. No one could find him. They said he probably ran, couldn't handle the stress, but I don't think that's what happened. I think whatever was out there got him. Or perhaps he found something in those classified files he couldn't live with, or couldn't live without. And I think it's still out there, waiting for someone else to show up. The thing about Alaska is that it doesn't care if you're prepared, if you're trained, if you think you know what's coming. It'll take you anyway, leave you frozen and forgotten. Like Morris, and Kendrick, and maybe Russell too. I never went back. Whatever they sent to clean up that place, I don't want to know how it ended. Some things are better left buried. I figure if I ever hear another one of those transmissions, I'll just turn off the radio. There are some calls you don't need to answer. But sometimes in the deepest hours of the night, I find myself listening, really listening to the spaces between stations, to the static and white noise that most people ignore. Listening for patterns, for rhythms that shouldn't be there, for clicking sounds like the ones we heard in those corridors. And sometimes, just sometimes, I think I hear them. Faint but growing stronger. Like something calling from very far away, or getting closer. And as for Morris, well, if there's one upside to this whole mess, it's that the guy owed me 20 bucks. Guess I won't have to worry about collecting on that. But in the darkest moments when I'm honest with myself, I know that debt might come due in other ways. The footprints leading away from the outpost haunt me still. Whatever we encountered there, whatever we briefly contained, it isn't over. It's just waiting, calling, transforming. I check my skin sometimes, looking for changes, for signs that something has begun to alter me from within. So far, nothing. But the night is long, and the signal, I fear, travels farther than we know. The assignment to Shoshone Hollow came without warning. After 5 years with the National Park Service at Yellowstone, I thought I had seen it all. Lost hikers, bear encounters, and even that one time with the illegal campers who nearly burned down half the forest. But nothing prepared me for what awaited me at this remote outpost in the northern Cascades. It's just a temporary posting, my supervisor had said, not quite meeting my eyes. 3 months max. The last ranger there, well, he requested a transfer, said he couldn't handle the isolation. I should have asked more questions. Should have wondered why 3 previous rangers had all requested transfers within 6 months. But the promotion came with a pay bump, and after my divorce I needed the money and the space to clear my head. The drive took nearly 9 hours, the last 2 on a barely maintained Forest Service road that threatened to rattle my old Jeep to pieces. When I finally arrived at the ranger station, a weathered log cabin perched on a bluff overlooking a mist-shrouded lake, the sun was already dipping behind the jagged mountain peaks. The cabin itself was surprisingly well equipped. Solar panels, satellite phone, emergency radio, and enough supplies to last through the winter if necessary. Previous rangers had left their mark. Initials carved into the wooden table, notes scribbled in logbooks, and one disturbing message scratched into the inside of a cabinet door. It watches from the tree line. I dismissed it as a prank, though. Something about those words made my skin prickle. My first week passed uneventfully. I familiarized myself with the trails, checked fishing permits at the lake, and enjoyed the solitude. The work was straightforward: maintain trails, assist the occasional hiker, monitor wildlife activity, and report back to headquarters weekly. On my 8th night, the first incident occurred. I was sitting on the cabin's porch, nursing a cup of coffee and watching the stars. The night was still. The kind of profound silence you only find in places truly untouched by civilization. Then I heard it, a sound that didn't belong. Footsteps, heavy, deliberate. Something large, moving through the underbrush about 50 yards from the cabin. I reached for my flashlight and swept the beam across the tree line. Nothing. But the footsteps continued, circling the clearing. Whatever it was keeping just beyond the reach of my light. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding small against the vastness of the wilderness. "Park ranger, identify yourself." The footsteps stopped. Then from the darkness came a sound that turned my insides cold. A low guttural vocalization that was neither human nor any animal I recognized. It started as a deep rumble, rising to something between a moan and a howl, before tapering off into a series of huffing breaths. I retreated inside, locking the door behind me. I told myself it was probably a bear, maybe a moose, though I knew neither made sounds quite like that. I slept with my service pistol on the nightstand. The next morning, I found the tracks, 18 inches long, humanoid but not human, pressed deep into the soft earth around the cabin. They circled the entire clearing, stopping at each window as if whatever made them had been looking inside. I took photos, made plaster casts, and reported the incident to headquarters. Their response was frustratingly vague. "Probably just a bear," the dispatcher said, though I could hear the hesitation in her voice. "We get unusual reports from that area sometimes. Nothing to worry about." But there was something to worry about, because over the next few days the encounters escalated. Items began disappearing from outside the cabin. First a hatchet I'd left by the woodpile, then one of my hiking boots from the porch. On the 3rd night, I woke to the sound of heavy breathing just outside my bedroom window. When I gathered the courage to look, I saw only darkness, but the next morning found claw marks gouged into the wooden window frame. I started keeping a journal, documenting every incident. I knew what the evidence suggested, but the rational part of my mind rejected it. Bigfoot, Sasquatch, whatever name you preferred. It was the stuff of campfire stories and cable TV shows, not something a professional park ranger could report without risking their career. Yet the signs were undeniable. Something large, bipedal and intelligent was stalking my cabin. Then came the night that changed everything. I was awakened by a tremendous crash as something struck the cabin wall with enough force to shake the entire structure. I grabbed my pistol and flashlight, heart pounding as more impacts followed, not random, but rhythmic, almost like knocking. It wanted in. From my window, I caught a glimpse of movement, a massive silhouette at least 7 feet tall, broad-shouldered and covered in what appeared to be dark fur. It moved with surprising grace for its size, melting back into the forest before I could get a clear look. The knocking continued at different points around the cabin, as if testing for weaknesses. I radioed for emergency assistance, but the nearest backup was hours away. "Just stay inside," the dispatcher advised. "Help will be there by morning." But morning felt impossibly distant as the creature outside grew more aggressive, its knocks becoming violent blows that threatened to break through the walls. The wooden door began to splinter as something massive threw itself against it repeatedly. In desperation, I fired a warning shot through the window. The sound echoed through the valley, and for a moment everything went silent. I held my breath, wondering if I'd scared it off. Then came a response that chills me to remember. Not retreat, but a roar of rage that seemed to shake the very air. Whatever was out there, my gunshot had only made it angry. The attack on the cabin intensified, windows shattered, the door frame cracked, and through the broken glass came the overwhelming smell of something wild. A musky, primal scent that triggered some ancient part of my brain screaming, "Predator." I retreated to the bathroom, the only room without windows, and wedged myself against the door, gun aimed at the hallway. The satellite phone was dead, the radio silent with static. For hours I listened to the creature tear at my cabin, occasionally catching glimpses of massive hairy limbs and gleaming eyes in the darkness. By dawn, the attacks had ceased, and I emerged to find my sanctuary in ruins. Claw marks scored the walls, the door hung from a single hinge, and pressed into the mud outside was a clear footprint, bigger than any I'd seen before. Whatever stalked Shoshone Hollow had made its presence known, and I was beginning to fear that the previous rangers hadn't requested transfers after all. 2 weeks after the attack on my cabin, reinforcements finally arrived, not in the form of fellow rangers but as a group of self-proclaimed cryptid hunters who had somehow gotten wind of the incident. "We monitor emergency frequencies," explained their leader, a burly man who introduced himself as Jack. His 3 companions, 2 men and a woman, unloaded equipment from their mud-splattered SUV. When we heard the call about a large aggressive animal at Shoshone Hollow, well, this area has a history. I should have sent them away. Civilians weren't authorized to conduct investigations on parkland, especially not armed with the rifles I glimpsed in their vehicle. But after 2 weeks of escalating encounters found carcasses of deer strung up in trees, more tracks, and nightly vocalizations that kept me from sleeping, I was desperate for allies, even unconventional ones. "What history?" I asked, leading them inside my partially repaired cabin. The woman, Meredith, pulled out a tablet and showed me newspaper clippings dating back to the 1890s. Prospector claims encounter with wild man of the woods. Forest devil terrorizes logging camp. 3 hunters missing after reports of massive creature. Shoshone Hollow has more reported Sasquatch activity than almost anywhere in the Pacific Northwest, she explained. Indigenous people avoided this valley for centuries, called it the place of the tall shadow. "I don't believe in Bigfoot," I said automatically, the words sounding hollow even to my ears. Jack gave me a knowing look. Neither did I, until one killed my brother in Olympic National Forest in '97. Official report says bear attack, but I saw the body. No bear walks on 2 legs and has opposable thumbs. Over the next few days, the hunters set up their equipment around my cabin. Motion-activated cameras, audio recorders, and what they called bait stations with food left to attract the creature. I allowed it against regulations, telling myself I was just humoring them while they helped repair my cabin. But as we worked, they shared stories from other expeditions, describing encounters with precision and detail that raised the hair on my neck because they matched exactly what I'd experienced. "They're territorial," Jack explained one evening as we sat around the fire pit. The others checking equipment nearby. "Usually avoid humans, but occasionally one decides to claim an area. When that happens, they systematically drive out any human presence." "How?" I asked, thinking of the previous rangers who had left. "Escalating intimidation. First watching, then vocalizations, property damage. If that doesn't work," he stared into the fire. "They're not mindless animals. They're intelligent, patient, and absolutely ruthless about protecting their territory." That night, something triggered every motion detector simultaneously. The cameras captured only blurry glimpses, a massive shape moving with impossible speed between the trees. But the audio recorders picked up something that made even Jack pale, a series of calls that seemed to be answering each other from different directions. "There's more than one," Meredith whispered, her earlier scientific confidence shaken. They're coordinating. The next day, one of their team, Ben, disappeared while checking a remote camera trap. We organized a search party, following his GPS tracker to a signal in a ravine 2 miles from the cabin. We found his backpack radio and the crushed remains of his camera. A trail of disturbed earth led deeper into the forest, as if something heavy had been dragged away. We need to call in the authorities, I insisted, already reaching for my radio. And tell them what? Jack snapped. That Bigfoot took Ben. They'll waste days looking in the wrong places. We find him ourselves. Against my better judgment, I agreed to 1 more day of searching before calling in emergency services. We followed the drag marks for miles, deeper into uncharted parts of the forest where the trees grew so dense they blocked out the sun. The trail led to the mouth of a cave hidden behind a waterfall, the kind of place that wouldn't appear on any Forest Service map. He's in there, Jack said with grim certainty, checking his rifle. We can't just go in guns blazing, I argued. If Ben is alive, if these things took him in there, Jack cut me off. He's already dead. They don't take prisoners. I insisted we approach cautiously. The cave entrance was narrow, forcing us to enter single file. The smell hit us immediately, a powerful musk mixed with the unmistakable stench of decay. Our flashlight beams revealed a tunnel that descended deeper into the earth, the walls marked with strange symbols that looked disturbingly like language. We found Ben's remains in a chamber about 50 yards in, what was left of them. The body had been torn apart, not randomly, but with purpose. Certain organs had been removed. Long bones had been extracted. It wasn't the feeding behavior of any predator, I knew. It was methodical, almost ritualistic. We need to go. Now, I whispered, the beam of my flashlight revealing more horrifying details the longer we stayed. Scattered around the chamber were other remains in various states of decomposition, some animal, some unmistakably human. The walls of the cave were lined with tools, crude but effective implements made from bone, stone, and scavenged metal. Some I recognized as items that had gone missing from my cabin. We turned to leave but stopped cold at a sound from the tunnel behind us. Heavy footsteps approaching fast. Too many sets to count. The creatures had circled behind us, cutting off our exit. There's another way out, Meredith whispered, pointing to a narrow fissure at the back of the chamber, airs flowing through it. We squeezed through just as the first of the creatures entered the chamber, massive, fur-covered forms moving with a terrible purpose. I caught only glimpses, enormous hands with opposable thumbs, powerful sloping shoulders, and faces that seemed caught between human and ape, yet somehow neither. The fissure led to a series of tunnels that honeycombed the mountain. We ran blindly, pursued by guttural calls that echoed all around us. Jack took the rear, and when the creatures drew too close, he turned and fired. The gunshots were deafening in the confined space, followed by a roar of pain that sounded disturbingly human. You hit one, Meredith cried. Won't stop them, Jack panted. Just make them angrier. He was right. The pursuit intensified, the creatures using their knowledge of the tunnels to herd us deeper into the mountain. I realized with growing horror that they weren't just chasing us. They were driving us somewhere. The tunnels eventually opened into an enormous cavern, so vast our lights couldn't reach the ceiling. The floor was littered with bones, thousands of them from animals and humans alike. Some were ancient, others disturbingly fresh. It's a killing floor, Jack whispered. They've been using this place for centuries. From the darkness at the far end of the cavern came movement, not just one creature but dozens. An entire clan, emerging from alcoves and side passages. They moved with deliberate purpose, not rushing now that they had us cornered. The legends were wrong, Meredith said, her voice shaking. They're not solitary creatures, they're social, organized. In the lead was the largest of them all, nearly 9 feet tall. Its body covered in dark fur except for its face, which bore ritual scarring in patterns that matched the symbols on the cave walls. Around its neck hung a grotesque trophy necklace of human teeth and fingers. It approached us with terrible intelligence in its eyes, carrying what at first looked like a club, but which I realized with horror was a crude axe made from a Park Service tool lashed to a femur bone, unmistakably human. We backed away until we hit the wall of the cavern. No escape. The creatures began to close in, moving with deliberate slowness, savoring our terror. Jack raised his rifle, but before he could fire, Meredith grabbed his arm. Wait, she said, her eyes fixed on something behind the creatures. Look. In an alcove at the back of the cavern was a collection of items carefully arranged on a stone shelf, pieces of uniform, badges, equipment. I recognized a name tag from one of the previous rangers. I keep trophies, Jack whispered. But it was more than that. Among the items were technological objects, flashlights, cameras, radios, all arranged with care as if on display. These weren't mindless beasts, they were studying us, learning from each kill. The leader stopped about 10 feet away. its massive head tilting as it studied us with disturbing intelligence. Then it did something none of us expected. It spoke, not in any human language, but in a series of complex vocalizations that the others clearly understood. They began to spread out, cutting off any possible route of escape. That's when I noticed the bones around us weren't randomly scattered. They formed a pattern, a spiral leading to the center of the cavern, where a deep pit exhaled fetid air from the bowels of the earth. They're not just killing intruders, I realized with sudden clarity. They're sacrificing them. The implications were too horrifying to contemplate. These creatures hadn't just claimed territory. They were defending something ancient, something hungry. The leader gestured toward the pit, its intentions unmistakable. One of us would be first. Dawn was breaking by the time I reached the ranger station, my clothes torn, body bruised and mind fractured by what I'd witnessed in the cavern. I was alone. Jack Meredith and their remaining teammate were gone, sacrificed to whatever ancient horror lurked beneath Shoshone Hollow. My escape had been luck, not skill. When the creatures had seized Jack, his screams still echo in my nightmares. I'd used the distraction to slip into a narrow side tunnel. For hours I crawled through crushing darkness, eventually finding my way to the surface miles from where we'd entered. I collapsed at my radio, calling in every available ranger, police officer, and emergency responder in the region. They arrived by midday, grim-faced men and women who looked at my wild eyes and torn clothing with skepticism that quickly turned to concern. There's a hostile group in the mountains, I explained, carefully avoiding terms like Bigfoot or Sasquatch that would immediately destroy my credibility. They've killed at least 4 people. We need search teams, weapons, backup. The search was organized with military precision. 36 personnel, split into 6 teams, each with tracking dogs and rifles. I led the main group back toward the waterfall cave, trying to ignore how the dogs whined and pulled against their leashes, refusing to follow the trail. Animals don't like this area, explained the K9 officer. Something about the smell. We found the cave entrance easily enough, but inside was nothing. The tunnel we'd followed had collapsed in a recent rock slide, or been deliberately sealed. Ground-penetrating radar revealed a network of caverns extending for miles beneath the mountain, but no safe way to access them. Maybe that's for the best, muttered one of the search team leaders, a veteran ranger who'd been suspiciously quiet during the briefing. Later, pulling me aside, he confessed, I was stationed near here in the 90s. We lost people then too. Management covered it up, called them accidents or desertions. You know what's out there, I said. It wasn't a question. No one who reports what you saw keeps their job, he replied simply. The official report will say your friends were killed by a bear. There are bodies down there, I insisted, decades of them, and they'll stay there. Some things the public isn't ready to know. That night, while the search teams camped around my cabin, I heard it again, that rhythmic vocalization carrying through the darkness. The others claimed not to hear it, but I saw the fear in their eyes, the way they huddled closer to the fire. By morning, the official story was taking shape, a tragic attack by a rogue bear. The cave was too dangerous to explore further. Case closed. But I knew better. And so did whatever watched us from the tree line, patient and calculating. After the search teams departed, leaving me with a replacement ranger who eyed me with equal parts pity and suspicion, I made a decision. I broke into the ranger station's secure records, accessing files labeled ecological anomalies planified. What I found confirmed my worst fears. Since the area was first designated federal land in 1892, over 60 people had disappeared within a 10-mile radius of my cabin. The reports showed a pattern, periods of intense activity followed by decades of quiet, as if the creatures retreated after collecting enough sacrifices. The government knew. They'd always known. But acknowledgement would mean evacuation, investigation, media attention, and the end of whatever arrangement had allowed human and other to coexist in uneasy detente for over a century. My replacement found me in the records room, surrounded by the evidence of a massive cover-up. You shouldn't be seeing those, he said quietly. People deserve to know what's out there, I replied. Do they? Think about it. Proof of an intelligent non-human species living among us. The panic, the hunting parties, the military response. He shook his head. Both sides would suffer. Both sides. They're killing people, only when threatened. Only when their territory is invaded. This is their home. We're the intruders. I stared at him, realization dawning. You're not here to replace me. You're here to silence me. His hand moved to his sidearm. I'm authorized to offer you a choice. Sign the non-disclosure agreements, accept reassignment to a desk job far from here, and live out your life in comfortable anonymity. Or, the threat hung in the air between us. How many rangers have made this choice? I asked. Enough. Most take the reassignment. And those who don't? His eyes flicked toward the forest. There are worse ways to disappear than a government pension. I signed the papers. What choice did I have? The alternative was to join the bones beneath the mountain, another sacrifice to creatures that had walked this continent long before humans arrived and would likely remain long after we departed. They gave me a desk job in Washington, D.C., processing permits and filing reports. Sometimes when I work late, I imagine I hear those rhythmic calls outside my window. Just my imagination, of course. The creatures don't leave their territory, or so we tell ourselves. But I've been tracking the patterns. Unexplained disappearances in national parks, hikers gone missing, rangers requesting transfers. The territories are expanding, and no one is connecting the dots because no one wants to see the pattern. No one wants to admit what lurks in the deep forests of America, watching and waiting with ancient patience. I keep the classified files I smuggled out of Shoshone Hollow in a safe deposit box along with my journal and the single piece of evidence I managed to preserve, a cast of an 18-inch footprint that would rewrite natural history if verified. My insurance policy in case they come for me. In case the nightmares become too much and I decide the public deserves the truth, whatever the consequences. Because the creatures of Shoshone Hollow aren't myth or legend. They're real, they're intelligent, and they're hungry. Sometimes I wonder what hungers beneath that mountain. What ancient pact was made between government agencies and the creatures of the deep forest? What price we pay for our illusion of dominion over the wilderness? But mostly I wonder how long before they tire of their designated territory. How long before they expand beyond the boundaries of parks and forests into the world of concrete and steel that we mistakenly believe keeps us safe. I hear they've been sighted on the outskirts of small towns now, testing our defenses, learning our weaknesses, waiting for the right moment to reclaim what was always theirs. My name is William Hawkins, but everyone calls me Will. I'm a park ranger at Great Smoky Mountains National Park in Tennessee. It's not just a job for me, it's my life. My family's been tied to this land for generations. My grandfather was a ranger here, and my dad followed in his footsteps. Now it's my turn. I know every trail, every tree, and every stream like the back of my hand. But this fall, something felt off. The drought had been dragging on for months, and the streams that usually ran clear and strong were nothing but dry beds of cracked earth. The forest was quieter than usual, almost too quiet. Even the animals seemed uneasy. One morning as I was walking along one of the older trails, I noticed something strange in one of the dried-up stream beds. The roots of the trees were exposed, but they didn't look normal. They twisted and curled in unnatural ways, almost like they were reaching for something or someone. Some of them even had patterns that looked like veins or circuits. I crouched down to get a closer look, and my stomach tightened with unease. I stood up quickly and tried to rationalize what I was seeing. It's just the drought affecting things, I told myself, trying to sound convincing, but deep down I wasn't so sure. Later that day I met up with Dr. Amelia Richardson, the park historian. Amelia's been researching Appalachian folklore for years, and she knows more about this area's history than anyone else alive. She was tracking down old settler stories about strange happenings in the mountains, tales of people disappearing or seeing things that couldn't be explained. "Will," she said as we walked along a trail together, "have you ever heard of the Rooted One?" I raised an eyebrow at her. "The Rooted One? Can't say I have." She nodded thoughtfully and adjusted her glasses. "It's an old legend from the settlers who first came here in the 1800s. They talked about something living deep in the forest, something connected to the roots of the trees." I laughed nervously. "Sounds like campfire stories to me." Amelia gave me a serious look. "Maybe, but there are too many accounts to ignore." Her words stuck with me as I went about my day, leading guided tours, clearing trails, and documenting how the drought was affecting the ecosystem. My daughter Lily was visiting for the summer, and she joined me on some of my rounds. She's 16 now, smart as a whip but stubborn as all get out, and she loves exploring the park as much as I do. That evening, James Bennett stopped by my cabin. James is a local hunter who knows these woods almost as well as I do. He looked uneasy as he sat down at my kitchen table. "Something ain't right out there," he said quietly, his voice low and gravelly. I poured us both a cup of coffee and sat across from him. "What do you mean?" "The animals," he said after a pause. "They're acting strange, spooked, like they're running from something." I frowned. "Could be the drought messing with their food sources." James shook his head firmly. "No, it's more than that." He leaned forward and lowered his voice even more. "I saw tracks near one of the old sinkholes, tracks I ain't ever seen before." I felt a chill run through me, but tried to play it cool. "What kind of tracks?" James hesitated before answering. "Big ones, like roots dragging across the ground." I didn't know what to say to that, so I just nodded slowly and took another sip of coffee. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I couldn't stop thinking about what James had said, or about those strange root structures I'd seen earlier in the day. Something wasn't right in these woods, and deep down I knew it wasn't just the drought. The next morning started like any other. The sun was barely peeking over the horizon, and the air had that crisp bite that comes with fall mornings. I grabbed my gear and headed out early, hoping to clear my head, but the uneasy feeling from last night hadn't gone away. It was only growing stronger. I decided to check out the area James had mentioned. It was an older part of the park, far from the usual hiking trails. The drought had hit this section hard, leaving the ground cracked and brittle. As I walked, I noticed something strange. The trees here didn't look healthy. Their bark was peeling, their leaves were shriveled, and their roots seemed restless, some of them poking out of the ground like they were trying to escape. About an hour into my hike, I heard a low rumble under my feet. It wasn't loud, just enough to make me stop in my tracks. Then, without warning, the ground gave way. I scrambled back as a sinkhole opened up right in front of me. Dirt and rocks tumbled into the dark pit below, and a cloud of dust filled the air. When it settled, I cautiously approached the edge and peered down. What I saw made my stomach drop. The sinkhole wasn't just a hole in the ground, it was a doorway to something else entirely. Tangled roots lined the walls, but they weren't random or natural looking. They were arranged in patterns, almost like wires or circuits running through the earth. The deeper I looked, the more it seemed like these roots were alive. I radioed Amelia immediately and told her what I'd found. She arrived about an hour later, out of breath and clutching her notebook. "Will," she said as she stared into the sinkhole, "this is incredible." "Incredible?" I asked, still feeling uneasy. "It's downright creepy." Amelia ignored me and started jotting down notes. "These root structures, they're almost technological." I shook my head. "That doesn't make any sense." She looked up at me with wide eyes. "Maybe it's not supposed to." Later that day, Amelia dug deeper into her research on Appalachian folklore while I kept an eye on the sinkhole. She called me over to her office that evening with something she'd found. "Will," she said, flipping through an old journal from one of the early settlers, "listen to this. Beware the rooted one, for it grows where life fades and feeds on what remains." I frowned. "Feeds on what remains? What does that mean?" Amelia shrugged but looked worried. "I don't know, but this drought might have something to do with it." As days passed, things started getting worse around the park. Plants near the sinkhole began growing at impossible rates. Vines stretched across trails overnight. Flowers bloomed out of season, and mushrooms popped up everywhere like they were taking over. At first it seemed harmless, just nature doing its thing, but then we started noticing changes in how these plants behaved. Vines moved when you walked by them, almost like they were reaching for you. Certain flowers glowed faintly at night, with an eerie bioluminescence that made me deeply uncomfortable. And then there were the spores. One afternoon, James came rushing into my cabin looking pale as a ghost. "I breathed something in," he said between gasps for air. "What happened?" I asked as I helped him sit down. "I was tracking deer near that sinkhole," he explained shakily, "and these spores came out of nowhere, like dust floating in the air." "What did they do?" I asked nervously. James looked at me with wide eyes. "I saw things that weren't real." He described vivid hallucinations, trees moving like they had minds of their own, and shadows whispering his name. I didn't know what to make of it until later that evening, when I went back to check on the sinkhole myself. As I stood near its edge, I noticed tiny particles drifting through the air. Spores, just like James had described. I held my breath and backed away quickly before they could reach me. That night, as I sat in my cabin trying to make sense of everything, I remembered something. A journal my grandfather had left behind before he disappeared 50 years ago in these very woods. I dug through old boxes until I found it, a worn leather-bound book with pages yellowed with age. As I flipped through it, one entry caught my eye. "We've seen it, the root walker," he wrote in shaky handwriting. "It's not just a legend, it's real." My hands trembled as I read his words. Whatever was happening here, it wasn't new, and whatever this thing was, it had been here all along. The next morning, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The forest seemed alive in a way it shouldn't be, like it was breathing, waiting. I decided to head back to the sinkhole to see if anything had changed. Amelia insisted on coming with me, even though I warned her about the spores. As we approached the site, the air felt heavier, like something was pressing down on us. The plants around the sinkhole had grown even more. Vines thicker than my arm twisted through the trees, and strange flowers with glowing centers dotted the ground. It didn't look like nature anymore. It looked wrong. Amelia crouched near the edge of the sinkhole, studying the roots that lined its walls. "Will," she said quietly, "these patterns, they're not random." "What do you mean?" I asked, keeping my distance from the spores floating in the air. She pointed to a section of roots that seemed to pulse faintly, like they were alive. "Look at this. It's almost like communication." I didn't like where this was going. Communication with what? Before she could answer, we heard a sound, a low creaking noise like wood bending under pressure. It was coming from somewhere deep within the sinkhole, and then we saw it. At first it was just movement, roots shifting and twisting together, but then it began to take shape. A figure rose slowly from the ground, assembling itself piece by piece from the surrounding vegetation. It looked human, but it wasn't. Its body was made of living wood and vines, its face a hollow mask with glowing fungal growths where eyes should be. Amelia froze in place, her notebook slipping from her hands. "Will?" I didn't let her finish. "Run," I whispered, but neither of us moved. The creature stepped forward, its movements slow and deliberate. The ground seemed to pulse with every step it took, and the plants around us shifted as if responding to its presence. Then it spoke, not in words but in a sound that echoed through the forest, vibrating in my chest like a deep hum. And somehow I understood what it was saying. It wasn't just alive, it was aware. Amelia grabbed my arm and pulled me back toward the trail. "We need to get out of here." But I couldn't move. My eyes were locked on the creature as it turned its hollow face toward me. And then I heard my grandfather's voice. "Will," it said softly, using his tone and cadence perfectly. "You've come back." My entire body went cold. "No," I whispered under my breath. Amelia looked at me in confusion. "What's wrong?" "That's my grandfather," I said shakily. "It's using his voice." The creature took another step forward, and vines began creeping toward us along the ground. Amelia grabbed me again and shouted, "We have to go now." This time, I listened. We ran as fast as we could back toward my truck, but the forest seemed to close in around us. Vines reached for our legs, flowers released clouds of spores into the air, and shadows moved where they shouldn't have been. By the time we reached safety, both of us were gasping for breath and covered in scratches from the plants trying to grab hold of us. Chapter 3. The Growth. Back at my cabin, Amelia tried to make sense of what we'd seen while I flipped through my grandfather's journal again. "It's not just a creature," he'd written years ago. "It's a part of the forest itself. It feeds on life and absorbs consciousness, but only when conditions are right." I thought about what he meant by conditions. The drought, the dying forest. It was all connected, and now it had found me. The next few days were a blur. Amelia and I couldn't shake the memory of what we'd seen. The creature, the root walker, wasn't just some legend or hallucination. It was real, and it was growing stronger. The plants around the sinkhole were spreading faster now, creeping into areas of the park they hadn't touched before. It felt like the forest itself was changing, becoming something else. Amelia dove into her research, determined to find answers. She spent hours poring over old documents and government records, trying to piece together the history of this place. Late one night, she called me over to her office. "Will," she said, her voice trembling, "I found something." She handed me a stack of papers, old reports from the 1940s. They detailed secret government testing in the area during World War II. They were experimenting with defoliants, she explained, trying to find ways to clear forests quickly for military operations. I frowned as I flipped through the pages. "And what does that have to do with this thing?" Amelia pointed to a section of one report that mentioned unexpected biological reactions. "They didn't just kill plants," she said quietly. "They woke something up." I stared at her, trying to process what she was saying. "You think they created this?" She shook her head. "No, I think it was already here. They just made it angry." The more we learned, the more dangerous it seemed. The root walker wasn't just some random creature. It was part of the forest itself, a living network connected to every tree, root, and plant in the area. And now it was spreading. That evening, James came by again. He looked worse than before, his skin pale and his movements slow, like he was fighting off some kind of sickness. "It's getting closer," he said weakly, as he sat down at my kitchen table. "What do you mean?" I asked. James lifted his shirt to show me his side. Vines were growing out of his skin, thin tendrils wrapping around his ribs like they were trying to pull him apart. I stepped back in horror. "James, what happened?" "I got too close," he said simply. "It's inside me now." Amelia rushed over and examined him carefully. "The spores," she muttered under her breath. "They're not just causing hallucinations, they're changing people." James grabbed my arm tightly and looked me in the eyes. "You have to stop it," he said firmly, "before it takes everything." I nodded, even though I had no idea how to fight something like this. After James left, Amelia and I started brainstorming ways to stop the root walker from spreading further. We knew it avoided salt and certain copper compounds, probably because they interfered with its ability to grow, but we didn't know if that would be enough. "We need to find its core," Amelia said determinedly as she packed up her gear. I hesitated before answering. "Its core?" She nodded. "Every organism has a central point, a brain or heart that controls everything else. If we can find where it's rooted, we might be able to stop it." It sounded insane, but at this point, I was willing to try anything. We prepared as best we could, packing bags with salt lines, copper solutions, and protective masks to keep out the spores, and headed back into the forest early the next morning. The deeper we went, the stranger things became. The trees were twisted beyond recognition, their trunks fused together like they'd grown into one massive organism. The ground pulsed faintly under our feet, and every step felt like walking on something alive. As we ventured deeper into the forest, I noticed the changes becoming more dramatic. Trees that should have stood separately were now connected by thick, pulsing vines. The ground beneath our feet no longer felt like soil. It was soft and yielding, almost like walking on flesh. The air grew thick with spores, forcing us to rely on our masks. "We're getting close," Amelia whispered, her voice muffled through her protective gear. "The concentration of abnormal growth is increasing." I nodded, unable to shake the feeling that we were being watched from all sides. The forest that had once been my sanctuary, my home, now felt alien and hostile. Nothing here was familiar anymore. We reached a clearing where the transformation was most evident. The trees here had grown together, forming grotesque archways and tunnels. Their bark had split open in places, revealing pulsing, vein-like structures underneath. The ground was covered in a thick carpet of unusual fungi, some of which glowed with an eerie phosphorescence. "Look," Amelia pointed to a pattern in the growth. "It's all connected. These aren't individual plants anymore, they're extensions of a single organism." I crouched down to examine one of the fungi. It seemed to react to my presence, bending slightly toward my hand even though I hadn't touched it. "Don't get too close," I warned Amelia. "Remember what happened to James?" She nodded grimly and made some notes in her journal. "According to your grandfather's writings, the root walker only becomes active during periods of extreme stress on the forest ecosystem. The drought must have triggered its awakening. But why is it absorbing people?" I asked, the image of my grandfather's face forming in the creature's body still fresh in my mind. Amelia's expression darkened. The government testing may have altered it somehow. Perhaps it discovered that human consciousness provided something it needed. Energy, memory, intelligence, I don't know. A sudden sound made us both turn. Something was moving through the underbrush. Something large. We crouched behind a fallen log, as a figure emerged from between the twisted trees. It was James, or what was left of him. His body was now more plant than human, vines growing through his skin and emerging from his eyes and mouth. He moved with jerky, unnatural motions, as if his limbs were being controlled by something else. "James," I called out softly, knowing it was foolish even as I did it. His head snapped toward us, and the voice that came from his mouth wasn't his own. "The forest remembers," he said in a hollow, echoing tone. "The forest absorbs. The forest becomes." Amelia grabbed my arm. "That's not James anymore, we need to go." But before we could move, James's body lurched forward with impossible speed. Vines shot out from his hands, wrapping around my leg and pulling me toward him. I cried out, fumbling for the container of salt in my pack. Amelia was faster. She threw a handful of salt directly at James's face. The effect was immediate and horrifying. The vines recoiled, and a high-pitched keening sound came from his throat. His skin began to bubble and dissolve where the salt had touched it, revealing more plant matter underneath. I broke free and scrambled away, my heart pounding in my chest. "Run!" I shouted to Amelia, and we both fled deeper into the forest, away from the thing that had once been my friend. We didn't stop running until we reached a small stream, one of the few that still had water in it despite the drought. The water seemed to create a natural boundary. The altered vegetation stopped abruptly at the water's edge. "Water," Amelia gasped, catching her breath. "It doesn't cross water readily. That's useful information." I nodded, still shaken by our encounter with James. "We need to find the core, fast, before more people end up like him." Amelia studied her maps and notes. "According to the patterns of growth in your grandfather's journal, the center of all this should be somewhere beneath the original sinkhole. There must be a network of tunnels or caverns down there." "Then that's where we're going," I said firmly, checking our supplies. We had enough salt and copper solution to last for a while, but not indefinitely. If we were going to stop this thing, we needed to do it soon. As we made our way toward the sinkhole, following the stream as far as we could, I noticed more signs of the root walker's influence. Birds with strange growths on their wings, small mammals with vine-like protrusions from their bodies. Even insects seemed affected, their carapaces fused with tiny plant fibers. "It's spreading through the entire ecosystem," Amelia observed grimly. "If we don't stop it, it could extend beyond the park boundaries." The thought of this infection reaching populated areas sent a chill through me. This wasn't just about saving the forest anymore. It was about preventing something much worse. When we finally reached the sinkhole again, it had changed dramatically. It was wider now, the edges crumbling inward as if being pulled down by some force below. The roots lining its walls pulsed with visible energy, and a faint glow emanated from deep within. There, Amelia pointed to what looked like an opening in the side of the sinkhole, about 20 feet down. That could be an entrance to the tunnel system. Getting down there wouldn't be easy, but we had come prepared with climbing gear. As I secured the ropes to a nearby tree, one that still looked normal, I couldn't help but wonder if we were making a terrible mistake. "Are you sure about this?" I asked Amelia. She looked at me with determination in her eyes. "Do we have a choice? If this thing spreads beyond the park..." She didn't need to finish the sentence. We both knew what was at stake. We descended into the sinkhole carefully, avoiding the pulsing roots as much as possible. The opening Amelia had spotted was indeed a tunnel, roughly circular and lined with the same root structures we had seen throughout the forest. It was large enough for us to walk through, though we had to crouch in places. The air inside was thick with spores, making our masks essential. As we moved deeper into the tunnel, the walls began to pulse around us as if breathing. Small, luminescent fungi provided enough light to see by, casting everything in an eerie blue glow. "These tunnels," Amelia whispered, examining the walls, "they're not natural formations. They've been grown, deliberately shaped by the root walker." I nodded, noticing how the passageways seemed to wind in a specific pattern, leading us ever downward. "It's like a circulatory system. These tunnels are the veins, and we're heading toward the heart." After what felt like hours of walking, the tunnel opened into a vast underground chamber. What we saw there made us both stop in our tracks. The chamber was enormous, stretching beyond what the dim fungal light could illuminate. The ceiling rose at least 30 feet above us, supported by massive columns of intertwined roots. But what dominated the space was the structure in the center, a pulsing, writhing mass of roots and vines that formed something like a throne. And upon that throne sat the root walker. It was larger now, more defined. Its body still shifted and changed constantly, but the basic humanoid shape remained. The glowing fungal growths that served as its eyes fixed on us as we entered the chamber. "William Hawkins," it spoke, using my grandfather's voice again. "You've finally come to join us." I stepped forward, trying to keep my voice steady. "What are you?" The creature's form rippled, and for a moment I saw faces in its surface, dozens of them, contorted in expressions of pain or ecstasy. I couldn't tell which. Among them was my grandfather's face, more distinct than the others. "We are the forest," it replied, its voice now a chorus of many tones speaking in unison. "We are what remains when all else fades. We adapt, we absorb, we become." "You're killing people," I said accusingly. The creature tilted its head, an unnervingly human gesture from something so alien. "Not killing, transforming, preserving. Your kind destroys without purpose. We give purpose to destruction." Amelia moved to stand beside me. "The military experiments in the 1940s, they changed you, didn't they?" The root walker's form shuddered, and the faces in its surface contorted in what might have been anger. "They tried to kill us with their poisons. Instead, they showed us a new way to survive. Your consciousness, your memories, they are energy we can use." I noticed movement around the edges of the chamber. Figures emerged from smaller tunnels, people, or what had once been people, now more plant than human. James was among them, his eyes now completely replaced by glowing fungi. They formed a circle around us, cutting off our escape. "You can't stop what's happening," the root walker continued. "The forest will reclaim what was taken, and you, William Hawkins, will help us, just as your grandfather did." My grandfather's face appeared more prominently in the creature's form. "Will," it said, using his voice perfectly. "Join us. It's not what you think. It's beautiful here, being part of something greater." I felt a moment of doubt, of temptation. What if it was telling the truth? What if this wasn't destruction but evolution? Amelia sensed my hesitation and grabbed my arm. "Will, that's not your grandfather. Not anymore. It's using his memories, his voice to manipulate you." Her words snapped me back to reality. I reached into my pack and pulled out a container of salt. "You're right. Whatever this thing is, it needs to be stopped." The root walker's form rippled with what might have been amusement. "Salt, copper, these are minor irritants to us now. We have grown beyond such weaknesses." "Maybe," I acknowledged. "But what about this?" I pulled out our last resort, a container of concentrated fungicide that Amelia had suggested might disrupt the root walker's biological systems. The creature's reaction was immediate. It recoiled on its throne, and the human-plant hybrids around the chamber let out a collective hiss. "You wouldn't," the creature said, uncertainty in its voice for the first time. "You would destroy an entire ecosystem to stop us?" "I'd destroy a cancer to save the host," I replied, stepping toward the central mass. "That's what you are, a cancer on this forest, not its savior." The root walker roared, a sound that shook the entire chamber, and the hybrid figures rushed toward us. Amelia threw handfuls of salt at them, creating gaps in their line, while I made a dash for the central throne. Vines whipped through the air trying to catch me. One wrapped around my leg, another around my arm. I felt a burning sensation where they touched bare skin, but I kept moving, dragging them with me. The central mass pulsed faster as I approached, almost like a heart beating in panic. A massive root burst from the ground in front of me, forming a barrier. I emptied half our salt supply onto it, watching as it withered and contracted. Behind me, I could hear Amelia shouting as she fought off the hybrids with whatever weapons we had. Finally, I reached the base of the throne. Up close, I could see that what I had thought was a single mass was actually thousands of intertwined roots, all converging on a central point, a glowing core that pulsed with energy. "Will, please," my grandfather's voice called out, desperate now. "If you destroy this, you destroy me too. Everything I am is here now." I hesitated, the container of fungicide heavy in my hands. "Your grandfather died 50 years ago," Amelia called out, her voice strained as she held off one of the hybrids. "That thing is just using his memory against you." She was right. Whatever consciousness the root walker had absorbed, it wasn't truly my grandfather anymore. It was just an echo, a tool being used to manipulate me. With a cry of determination, I poured the fungicide directly onto the glowing core. The effect was immediate and violent. The root walker let out a scream that seemed to come from every direction at once, a sound of rage and pain that made the very earth shake. The core began to dim, its pulsing becoming erratic. The vines holding me suddenly went limp, dropping away from my body. Throughout the chamber, the hybrid figures collapsed like puppets with their strings cut. "We need to get out of here," Amelia shouted, grabbing my arm. "The whole place is coming down." She was right. The ceiling of the chamber was cracking, roots and earth raining down around us. The tunnels were collapsing, the entire underground network failing as its controlling intelligence died. We ran for the tunnel we'd entered through, ducking under falling debris and jumping over collapsing sections of floor. Behind us, the root walker's form was dissolving, breaking apart into individual roots and vines that withered and blackened as the fungicide spread through the network. The climb back up the sinkhole was desperate and terrifying, with the walls crumbling around us. When we finally reached the surface, we didn't stop running until we were well clear of the area. Looking back, we saw the sinkhole collapse in on itself completely, sending up a cloud of dust and spores. For several minutes, we just stood there, catching our breath and watching as the forest seemed to settle. The unnatural growth around the sinkhole was already beginning to wither, returning to normal plant matter. "Do you think we got it?" Amelia asked finally. "Is it really gone?" I thought about the extensive root network we'd seen, how far it had spread throughout the forest. "I don't know. Maybe we destroyed its core, its consciousness, but something like that. I'm not sure it can ever be completely eradicated." In the days that followed, we monitored the forest closely. The affected areas began to return to normal. The strange growths died off, and the animals stopped behaving oddly. James and the other people who had been partially transformed were gone. Whether dead or fled into the deeper parts of the forest, we couldn't tell. Amelia documented everything meticulously, though we agreed to keep the full truth from the park authorities. Who would believe us anyway? We told them there had been an unusual fungal bloom caused by the drought, nothing more. But I knew better. At night, I could still hear whispers in the rustling of leaves, could still feel eyes watching me from the shadows between trees, and sometimes when the wind blew just right, I could swear I heard my grandfather's voice calling my name from deep within the forest. The drought eventually broke, rain returned to the mountains, and the streams flowed strong again. Life in the park seemed to return to normal, but I remained vigilant, always watching for signs that the root walker was returning. Because deep down, I knew the truth. It wasn't gone. It was just waiting, dormant for the right conditions to return. And when they did, when the forest was stressed and vulnerable again, it would emerge once more. So I stay here, keeping watch, because this is my home, my responsibility, and because no one else would understand what lurks beneath the roots of the Great Smoky Mountains. The Wanagiska Wilderness wasn't on any tourist maps. That's exactly why I took the ranger position when it opened up. After 8 years working overcrowded national parks, listening to visitors complain about spotty cell service while standing before nature's grandeur, I craved isolation. Wanagiska offered that in abundance. 200,000 acres of untouched forest, craggy mountains and mist-covered valleys in the Pacific Northwest. The name came from an obscure indigenous dialect, meaning land of shadows. I'd soon learn how fitting that name truly was. My cabin sat on the edge of Lake Ojote, a perfect mirror on windless days, reflecting the ancient pines that surrounded it like silent sentinels. The nearest town, Millerton, was a 2-hour drive down a winding gravel road that became impassable during heavy rains. My supervisors at the Forest Service made it clear during my interview. You'll be alone out there most of the time. Self-sufficiency isn't just recommended, it's required. That suited me fine. My duties were straightforward: monitor trail conditions, assist the occasional lost hiker, track wildlife populations, and manage the small visitor center that rarely saw visitors. The cabin itself was rustic but functional: solar panels for minimal electricity, a wood stove for heat, a shortwave radio for emergencies, and a small motorboat to patrol the lake. Ranger Josephine Blackwell was my only regular human contact. At 57, she'd been working these woods longer than I'd been alive. She operated the northern station, about 18 miles up the ridge. We'd check in via radio every morning and evening, a protocol neither of us particularly enjoyed but followed religiously. Morning check, Wanagiska south to north, over. I called into the crackling radio on my third day. North here. All quiet. Watch the western trails today. Storm came through and likely downed some trees. Over. Joe's voice was always calm, matter of fact. Copy that. I'll clear what I can. Out. I packed my gear: axe, small chainsaw, first aid kit, water, rations, map, compass, and the .45 sidearm all rangers carried, officially for protection against aggressive wildlife. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and wet earth as I headed out. The western trail started just behind my cabin, winding up through increasingly dense forest. 2 hours in, I found the first downed tree, a massive old pine blocking the path. As I fired up the chainsaw, something stopped me. A peculiar silence had fallen over the forest. No birds, no insects, nothing but the whisper of wind through needles. The hair on my arms stood up despite the warming day. That's when I noticed the footprints. They crossed the trail about 20 yards beyond the fallen tree. At first glance, they resembled bear tracks, but something was off. They were too elongated, the toe impressions too distinct, and they were huge, easily 16 inches long. I'd studied every predator species in these woods, and nothing matched what I was seeing. I approached cautiously, camera in hand instead of the chainsaw now. The impressions were deep, suggesting whatever made them was heavy. Following the tracks with my eyes, I saw they continued up the mountain, disappearing into a thicket of dense underbrush. A branch snapped somewhere in that direction. Then another, closer. Something large was moving toward me. Training kicked in. I backed away slowly, hand moving to my sidearm. The movement stopped. I could feel eyes on me, watching from the shadows between trees. My breathing quickened as I continued retreating, never turning my back to the presence I could sense but not see. "Hello," I called out, immediately regretting breaking the silence. "Forest Service, identify yourself." No response came except for what sounded like deep rhythmic breathing. I caught a whiff of something musky and wild, not the usual forest smells but something alive and primal, something watching me. I took another step back, and my boot connected with a loose stone. As I stumbled slightly, a low rumbling growl emanated from the thicket. Not quite bear, not quite human. My blood seemed to congeal in my veins. That's when I saw it, just a glimpse through the foliage. A massive silhouette standing upright where no bear would stand. In the dappled forest light, I made out what appeared to be a broad sloped shoulder covered in dark fur before it moved with surprising grace behind a massive pine trunk. I didn't wait to see more. Logic and professional composure abandoned me as I turned and ran back down the trail. Only when the cabin came into view did I slow, lungs burning, sweat soaking my uniform despite the cool air. That evening I lied during radio check. All clear in the western section. Removed 2 downed trees. No unusual activity to report. I couldn't bring myself to tell Josephine what I'd seen or thought I'd seen. Rangers who reported mythical creatures didn't last long in the service. Besides, there had to be a rational explanation. Perhaps a diseased bear walking oddly. Maybe light and shadow playing tricks. But as darkness fell over Lake Ahote, I loaded my sidearm and kept it within reach. Outside my window, the ancient forest seemed to press closer, the darkness between the trees deeper than before, and somewhere out there I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever I'd encountered was still watching, waiting, assessing. I fell into an uneasy sleep that night, dreaming of massive footprints leading to my door, and heavy breathing just outside my window. A week passed without incident. I'd almost convinced myself that stress and isolation had caused me to overreact to a perfectly normal forest encounter. Almost. The spring hiking season had begun, bringing the occasional backpacker through my station. Most were experienced outdoorsmen who needed little more than a trail update and a permit stamp. But the couple who arrived at midday were different. City folks with brand new gear and matching North Face jackets that still had the tags attached. "We're looking for the trail to Eagles Point," the man said, studying his smartphone GPS that wouldn't work once they were 2 miles in. His name was Gregory Hudson, a software engineer from Seattle. His girlfriend, Brooke Winters, kept glancing nervously at the tree line as if expecting something to leap out at any moment. Eagles Point is a strenuous 8-mile hike, I explained, spreading the map on the counter. The trail gets difficult after the first ridge. Given your experience level and the time of day, I'd recommend Lakeshore Trail instead. You can still make camp before dark. Gregory seemed disappointed but agreed. As I issued their backcountry permit, Brooke finally spoke. Have there been any unusual wildlife sightings recently? Her voice was quiet, hesitant. I looked up sharply. What do you mean by unusual? She exchanged a glance with Gregory before continuing. We have a friend who hiked here last month. He came back, different, kept talking about seeing something in these woods that followed him for days. My pulse quickened, but I maintained my professional demeanor. We have black bears, mountain lions, and occasionally wolves. All keep their distance if you follow proper precautions. I stamped their permit with more force than necessary. Make noise while hiking, store food properly, stay on marked trails. They left looking unconvinced, and I couldn't blame them. I hadn't even convinced myself. That evening, the weather changed abruptly. A heavy fog rolled in from the mountains, blanketing the lake in an impenetrable white shroud. Visibility dropped to less than 20 feet. During evening radio check, Josephine warned me it would likely last through the night. Keep your ears open, she added cryptically before signing off. Around 2 a.m., the sound of my emergency radio jolted me awake. Through bursts of static, I heard Brooke's panicked voice. Help, something outside our tent, not an animal, please. The transmission cut off. I tried to respond, but received only static. Protocol dictated waiting until dawn for search and rescue operations in dangerous conditions, but I couldn't sit idle knowing they were in trouble. I dressed quickly, gathering essential gear, high-powered flashlight, first aid kit, emergency blankets, GPS unit, radio, and my sidearm. The fog had thickened, transforming familiar surroundings into an alien landscape. My flashlight beam penetrated only a few yards before dissolving into the mist. Lakeshore Trail should have been easy to follow even in these conditions, but nothing felt right. Familiar markers seemed moved or missing. The usual night sounds, owls, distant coyotes, rustling small animals were conspicuously absent. Only the sound of water lapping at the shore and my own breathing accompanied me. An hour into the search, I found their campsite, or what remained of it. The tent lay in shreds, its contents scattered across a wide radius. No blood, thankfully, but no sign of Gregory or Brooke either. Their backpacks remained, food untouched in the bare canister they'd properly hung from a tree branch. Gregory, Brooke, I called, my voice sounding muffled in the fog. Something crunched underfoot. Gregory's smartphone, screen shattered but still glowing weakly. I picked it up, noticing it was recording audio. Against better judgment, I pressed play. At first just normal campsite sounds. Whispered conversation, the rustle of sleeping bags. Then, silence broken by a twig snapping nearby. Gregory's voice. What was that? Brooke shushing him. More silence, stretching for nearly a minute. Then breathing deep, heavy breathing that wasn't coming from inside the tent. Something moving around their campsite. Brooke whispering, it's standing right outside. Gregory's voice, barely audible. Don't move. A long, low vocalization followed. Not quite a growl, not quite speech, raising the hair on my neck. The recording ended with the sound of the tent zipper opening, and Brooke's scream. I stood frozen, listening to the silence that followed the recording. Then, from somewhere in the fog behind me came the same vocalization I'd just heard on the phone. A deep rumbling call that vibrated through the ground beneath my feet. I spun around, flashlight beam slicing through fog. For a moment I caught sight of something massive moving between trees. A flash of dark fur. The suggestion of a broad back disappearing into white mist. Without thinking, I pursued. Forest Service. Stop right there. I knew even as I shouted how absurd it was. Whatever I was following wasn't human and wouldn't heed my commands. The fog seemed to part momentarily, and I glimpsed Gregory stumbling through the underbrush ahead, alone and disoriented. I called out to him, but he either didn't hear or was too terrified to stop. He veered off the trail into dense forest, and I followed, pushing through branches that clawed at my face and clothes. The ground began to slope upward sharply. This wasn't right. Lakeshore Trail should have remained level. Somehow we'd ended up on a different path entirely, heading toward the mountains. Gregory remained just out of reach, a fleeting shadow in the mist. Suddenly the trees opened into a small clearing, and Gregory was gone. In his place stood a figure that defied logical description. In the direct beam of my flashlight, I could no longer deny what I was seeing. A massive, fur-covered form standing upright on two legs. It stood at least 8 feet tall, with broad shoulders and long arms that hung below its knees. The face remained in shadow, but I could feel its gaze fixed directly on me, for what felt like minutes but could only have been seconds. We stood facing each other across the clearing. My hand hovered near my sidearm, but some instinct told me it would be useless. Then, deliberately, the creature raised one massive hand and pointed deeper into the forest before turning and disappearing with surprising silence into the fog. Trembling, I moved cautiously in the direction it had indicated. About 50 yards further, I found both Gregory and Brooke, huddled together at the base of a massive tree, shivering but unharmed. "It brought us here," Brooke whispered, eyes wide with shock. "It could have, but it just led us here, and left us." "What was it?" Gregory asked, his former confidence shattered. I had no answer that wouldn't sound insane. "Let's get you both back to the station. We can sort this out there." As we made our way back following my GPS rather than trail markers, none of us spoke about the creature, but all of us remained alertly scanning the fog around us, jumping at every sound. Just before we reached the lakeside trail, I found fresh tracks crossing our path, the same enormous footprints I'd seen a week earlier. Only this time, they weren't alone. Alongside the massive prints were two sets of human footprints, Gregory's and Brooke's walking parallel, not running, not dragged, as if they'd been escorted. Back at the station, I gave them dry clothes and hot coffee. When they'd calmed sufficiently, I asked them to describe exactly what happened. "It was watching us all day," Brooke said quietly. "We felt it. When we made camp, it came closer." Gregory nodded. "When it tore open the tent, we ran in different directions. I got completely turned around in the fog. Then, it found me. It could have," he swallowed hard. "Instead, it herded me, like a sheepdog with a stray lamb, until we found Brooke again. Then it brought us both to that tree, and just watched us from a distance until you came." I filed an official report. Hikers disoriented in fog, tent damaged by unknown animal, subjects recovered safely. Nothing about giant footprints or 8-foot fur-covered figures. Nothing that would raise questions or bring unwanted attention to Wanagiska. After Gregory and Brooke left the next morning, I sat alone in my cabin, staring at the plaster cast I'd made of one of the footprints. Whatever roamed these woods had encountered humans before. It knew our habits, our equipment. It had deliberately led 2 lost hikers to safety and guided me to them. This wasn't some mindless creature, and somehow that made the forests of Wanagiska feel even more dangerous. The incident with Gregory and Brooke changed something fundamental about my relationship with Wanagiska. I'd come seeking isolation but now felt constantly observed. Every crack of a branch, every rustle in the underbrush made me tense. I began carrying my sidearm even for routine tasks around the cabin. Sleep came in fitful bursts, interrupted by dreams of being watched through my windows by eyes just above the roofline. 2 weeks after the fog incident, Josephine made a rare visit to my station. She arrived unannounced in her green Forest Service truck, expression unreadable beneath her wide-brimmed hat. "Thought I'd check your equipment inventory in person," she said by way of greeting, though we both knew it was an excuse. Monthly inventories were done via radio check. Inside my cabin, she accepted a cup of coffee and got straight to the point. "Your report about the Hudson Winters incident was incomplete." My hand froze halfway to my mouth. "I documented everything relevant." Josephine fixed me with a steady gaze. "Did you now? Nothing unusual about how you found them?" "They got lost in the fog, it happens." She nodded slowly, then reached into her pack and produced a small leather journal, weathered by years of use. "I've been in these woods for 36 years. Started keeping this in my 2nd season." She opened it, revealing pages of handwritten notes, sketches, and what looked like pressed plant specimens. She flipped through until she found what she wanted, then turned it toward me. On the page was a detailed sketch of a footprint identical to the one I'd found. "First saw these in '97, she said, matter-of-factly. "Then again in 2002, 2008, 2013, and now apparently 2025. Always in spring, always following unusual weather." I stared at the drawing, my professional skepticism battling with the evidence of my own eyes. "What do you think it is?" "Locals have stories going back generations. The Chinook called it Sufsleek, the wild one. Loggers had different names. Me, I just call it the warden." "The warden?" She took a sip of coffee. "Been watching me for decades. Never threatened me once. But it has rules." "Rules?" I echoed, feeling like a parrot. "Stay on established trails. Don't cut healthy trees. Don't hunt in certain areas. Cross those lines and it lets you know." She closed the journal. 3 missing hikers in my time here. All found exactly the same way. Disoriented but unharmed. Claiming something herded them to safety after they'd become lost. I told her everything then. The footprints, the encounter on the western trail, what I'd witnessed in the fog. She listened without interruption, nodding occasionally as if I was confirming long-held suspicions. "Why keep this quiet?" I finally asked. "Why not report it properly?" Josephine's laugh was dry as autumn leaves. "You know exactly why. Either we'd be dismissed as crazy, or worse, they'd believe us. Worse if they believed us? Think about it. If official confirmation of Sasquatch got out, what happens to Wanagiska? Research teams, media, tourists with cameras, hunters with rifles. This place would be trampled to death within a year. She leaned forward. Whatever it is, it was here long before us and will be here long after. This is its territory. We're just visiting. After she left, I pulled out topographical maps of the wilderness area and began marking locations where I'd first seen the tracks, where Gregory and Brooke had encountered it, spots where I'd felt watched. A pattern emerged. All incidents occurred near boundaries, where maintained trails ended, where the old-growth forest began, where human presence gave way to true wilderness. Territorial markers. The warden was patrolling its borders. That night, I made a decision. If I was going to continue working in Wanagiska, I needed to understand the rules of engagement. I packed for an overnight trek, leaving my sidearm behind. A gesture of trust, however foolish. I chose a trail Josephine had specifically mentioned in her journal, Sentinel Ridge, which local legends marked as a boundary not to be crossed. The day was clear, unusually warm for early spring. As I hiked, I deliberately left clear signs of my passage, breaking the first rule of wilderness travel. I wanted to be found. The ridge trail climbed steadily through changing forest ecosystems, from the mixed pine and fir of the lower elevations to ancient gnarled alpines that had weathered centuries of mountain storms. By late afternoon, I reached the actual ridge, a knife edge of stone offering spectacular views across the wilderness. To the east lay the maintained areas of the park. To the west, untouched valleys rarely seen by human eyes. I made camp precisely on the boundary, pitching my tent on the ridge itself. As dusk fell, I lit a small fire, another calculated risk, as fires were technically prohibited above certain elevations. The flames cast dancing shadows against surrounding trees as darkness enveloped the mountain. Around midnight, the feeling of being watched intensified. The forest had gone silent again, that unnatural hush I was beginning to recognize as a warning sign. I remained seated by my fire, outwardly calm despite my racing heart. "I know you're there," I said aloud, my voice sounding thin in the vast darkness. "I'm not crossing your boundary. I just want to understand." No response came, but the sensation of observation didn't abate. I continued speaking, feeling slightly ridiculous but pressing on. "I'm here to protect this place too, from fires, from people who don't respect it. We want the same thing." A rock clattered down the slope behind me. I didn't turn, using every ounce of self-control to remain facing the fire. "The locals call you the warden. Is that what you are? A guardian?" The sound of heavy breathing came from the darkness beyond my firelight, that same deep rhythmic pattern I'd heard before. It circled my camp, always just out of sight. I fought the instinct to reach for a weapon that wasn't there. Hours passed this way, me talking occasionally, the presence circling, neither of us crossing the invisible line between observation and contact. Eventually, exhaustion overcame fear, and I dozed beside the dying fire. I woke at dawn to find my campsite transformed. The fire had been expertly extinguished, covered with rocks in the proper wilderness manner. My scattered gear had been neatly arranged beside my tent, and encircling my entire camp was a ring of broken branches stuck into the ground, a clear boundary. Most disturbing of all, a crude arrow had been formed from stones pointing east back toward my cabin, away from the wilderness beyond the ridge. The message couldn't have been clearer. "Go back. Stay away. This is the line." I packed quickly, taking care to leave no trace beyond the strange marker circle, which I photographed from every angle before departing. As I descended the trail, that feeling of being watched gradually diminished. By the time I reached the forest below, I was alone again, or as alone as anyone ever was in Wanagiska. Back at my cabin, I added the ridge to my map of boundary encounters. A picture was forming, not just of territory but of purpose. The warden wasn't merely defending a physical space. It was maintaining a separation between worlds, the human and the wild, the known and the unknown. And I was standing directly on that increasingly fragile boundary. Summer arrived in Wanagiska with an unprecedented heat wave. Temperatures soared into the high 90s for weeks, turning the normally lush forest dangerously dry. Fire risk reached critical levels. The Forest Service implemented Stage 3 restrictions, no backcountry camping, no fires of any kind, and several trail closures. Despite the restrictions, visitor numbers increased. Urban dwellers sought escape from sweltering cities, ignoring warnings and regulations in their desperation for cool mountain air. My days became an endless cycle of issuing citations, breaking up illegal campsites, and patrolling for fire hazards. Throughout it all, the warden remained unseen, but never unfelt. Several times I'd arrive at reported illegal campsites to find them already abandoned, equipment hastily packed, occupants gone. Rangers from other districts joked about Wanagiska's spooky reputation that kept visitors in line. If only they knew. In late July, lightning strikes ignited 3 separate wildfires in the northern section of the wilderness. 2 were quickly contained, but the third, in a remote valley near Josephine's territory, proved stubborn. Soon, the entire northern district was filled with smoke and fire crews. During our evening radio check, Josephine's voice carried unusual tension. "They're cutting fire lines into the old growth on Ruby Creek. Heavy equipment." She didn't need to explain further. Ruby Creek lay in a valley that all her journal notes marked as strictly forbidden territory. "The incident commander knows what he's doing," I said, though uncertainty crept into my voice. "They need to contain it before it reaches the eastern ridges." Perhaps. Her radio went silent for a moment. "Be vigilant tonight." The warning proved prophetic. Shortly after midnight, my emergency radio crackled to life. A bulldozer operator working the fire line had gone missing. He'd stepped away from his machine to check something in the forest and hadn't returned. Search crews were being assembled. I drove north immediately, the winding road illuminated by the eerie orange glow of the distant fire. Smoke hung thick in the air, carrying the acrid smell of burning pine. By the time I reached the command post, organized chaos reigned. Fire crews worked tirelessly on the main blaze, while search teams prepared to enter the forest. The incident commander, a veteran firefighter named Rivera, briefed me quickly. "Operator's name is Mike Sullivan, 42, experienced. Radio check missed at 23. Machine found idling at the edge of the cut line here." He pointed to a map. "Search diameter expanding now." I studied the map, a cold knot forming in my stomach. The bulldozer had been cutting directly through an area marked in Josephine's journal with a simple warning: "No entry." "I know these woods better than anyone except Ranger Blackwell," I said. "Let me take the northeastern quadrant alone." Rivera hesitated. "Protocol says minimum 2-person teams. With all due respect, we're shorthanded, and I can cover more ground solo. I have extensive search and rescue certification." This was stretching the truth, but he didn't need to know that. He relented, and I set out. Headlamp illuminating the smoke-filled forest. Once out of sight from the command post, I switched off my lamp and paused, letting my eyes adjust to the darkness. If Sullivan had encountered what I suspected, conventional search methods wouldn't help. I moved quietly, following game trails rather than crashing through underbrush. The smoke provided strange acoustic properties, muffling some sounds while amplifying others. Through the haze, I caught glimpses of the fire's glow, a malevolent sunset in the wrong direction. An hour into my search, I found the first sign, a hard hat lying on the ground, well beyond where Sullivan should have ventured alone. Nearby, the underbrush showed signs of someone moving quickly, not along any path but crashing desperately through the forest. I reported the find via radio, then continued following the trail of disturbed vegetation. It led steadily uphill, away from the fire, and deeper into forbidden territory. Occasionally, I found more evidence: a torn piece of high-visibility vest, a dropped flashlight, a water bottle. The path of flight ended abruptly at a rock face rising 20 feet high, a natural barrier forming another territorial boundary. Sullivan's boot prints showed where he'd frantically tried to climb the slick stone before giving up. That's when I noticed the other prints surrounding the now familiar massive footprints of the warden, but not just one set. At least 3 distinct sizes and patterns circled Sullivan's position. I felt a chill despite the summer heat. There were more of them. A faint sound caught my attention, not from above as I expected, but from below, inside the rock face itself. I moved closer, discovering a narrow crevice partly hidden by brush. The sound came again, a human moan. "Sullivan?" I called softly. "Mike Sullivan, Forest Service. Are you hurt?" Another moan, followed by a weak voice. "Help. In here." I squeezed through the crevice, finding myself in a narrow passageway that opened into a small natural cave. My headlamp revealed Sullivan lying on the stone floor, pale and shocked but largely uninjured aside from some scratches and bruises. "Thank God," he whispered when he saw me. "How did you find me?" "They said no one would." I knelt beside him, checking his vitals. "Who said that, Mike?" His eyes widened. "You wouldn't believe me. I barely believe it myself." "Try me." He described how he'd spotted unusual movement at the forest edge while operating his bulldozer, thinking it might be wildlife endangered by the fire. He'd gone to investigate. What he found instead were 3 massive fur-covered figures watching his machine cut through ancient trees. "They were so fast," he said, voice trembling. "Before I could run, they had me. Could have torn me apart easily, but they just carried me, brought me here." "Did they harm you?" He shook his head. "Scared the hell out of me, but no. The big one brought water, left it there." He pointed to a crude bark container. "Been here hours, thought I'd die in here." Getting Sullivan out required careful navigation of the narrow passage. Once outside, I radioed our position and status. While waiting for the extraction team, I examined our surroundings more carefully. The cave entrance was well concealed, visible only from certain angles, a perfect observation post or hiding place. "They're not animals," Sullivan said suddenly, breaking the silence. The way they looked at me, there was intelligence there, and anger. I nodded. We crossed a line, cut down trees that have stood for centuries. For a fire break, he protested weakly. "To protect the rest of the forest." "I know, but I don't think they see it that way." The extraction team arrived 30 minutes later, bringing a backboard for Sullivan, although he insisted he could walk. As they prepared him for transport, I noticed fresh prints in the soft earth nearby. The warden and its companions had been watching us the entire time. On our walk back to the command post, the search team leader pulled me aside. "How'd you find him so quickly? That cave wasn't on any of our maps." I shrugged. "Just got lucky, I guess." But luck had nothing to do with it. The warden had wanted Sullivan found, had practically led me to him. A warning, not a threat. A message delivered and received. Back at the fire command center, I sought out Rivera. "You need to redirect the bulldozers. Cut your line further east, away from Ruby Creek Valley." He frowned. "That adds miles to the line and puts us dangerously close to the access road." "Trust me," I insisted. "That valley is unstable. Dangerous terrain." Sullivan was lucky. Next person might not be. Whether it was something in my expression or simply respect for local knowledge, Rivera reconsidered. By morning, the heavy equipment had been repositioned according to my recommendation. The fire was contained 3 days later without further incidents. As crews began cleanup operations, I visited the original fire line where it abruptly ended at the edge of Ruby Creek Valley. The massive machines had left an ugly scar across the landscape, toppled trees lying like fallen soldiers. Beyond the line, the ancient forest stood undisturbed, and at the precise boundary between destruction and preservation lay a perfect row of massive footprints, a line drawn in the earth itself. Message received. Indeed, as summer faded into autumn, an uneasy truce settled over Wanagiska. The fire scars remained visible on the northern slopes, but new growth had already begun. Nature's resilience on display. Tourism decreased with the cooling temperatures, allowing the wilderness to exhale after the pressure of human presence. I continued my duties with a heightened awareness of boundaries. My maps now contained detailed markings of territories, observations, and encounters. I'd begun my own journal inspired by Josephine's decades of documentation. In its pages, I recorded not just factual observations but theories, impressions, and the gradual evolution of my understanding. On a crisp October morning, I received an unexpected radio call from headquarters. The regional supervisor would be visiting all ranger stations for end-of-season assessments. My evaluation was scheduled for the following day. Regional Supervisor Maxwell Hayes was a career bureaucrat with little field experience but significant political ambition. His arrival at my cabin in a spotless SUV, wearing an immaculately pressed uniform more suited to a press conference than a remote wilderness station, set my teeth on edge immediately. "Ranger." He greeted me with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I've been reviewing your incident reports from this season. Fascinating reading." I maintained a neutral expression. "It was an eventful summer, sir." "Indeed." He glanced around my cabin, gaze lingering on the maps with their cryptic markings. Fire crew deployment, lost hikers, missing equipment. And yet consistently positive outcomes. Some might call it lucky. "Just doing my job, sir." Hayes picked up a plaster cast of a footprint I'd carelessly left visible on my desk. "And what exactly is this part of your job?" My mouth went dry. "Wildlife tracking. Standard monitoring procedure." "Really?" "Because it looks remarkably like what some would call Bigfoot evidence." His tone became condescending. "I hadn't pegged you for one of those, Ranger." "Sir." He set down the cast with visible distaste. "We've had reports, hikers claiming they were herded by creatures, a bulldozer operator telling wild stories after getting himself lost. All in your district. People experience strange things in the wilderness," I said carefully. "Stress, isolation, fear, they can affect perception." "Precisely my point." Hayes smiled again, this time with satisfaction. "Which is why I'm implementing new protocols for Wanagiska. Increased accessibility, additional marked trails, a proper visitor center near Ruby Creek. We've secured federal funding to enhance the wilderness experience." Each word hit like a physical blow. Ruby Creek, the very heart of the warden's territory, transformed into a tourist attraction. "With respect, sir, developing Ruby Creek would be a mistake. The ecosystem there is fragile, the terrain unstable. Your concerns are noted, Ranger, but the decision has been made. Preliminary surveys begin next week. Construction in spring." He handed me a thick folder. Here's the development plan. Make yourself familiar with it. You'll be expected to assist the survey team. After he left, I sat at my desk, stunned. The development plan outlined a comprehensive transformation of Wanagiska's most sacred spaces, paved pathways, viewing platforms, comfort stations, all penetrating deep into areas I now understood were fiercely protected boundaries. That evening I broke protocol and drove to Josephine's station without radio notice. I found her sitting on her porch, seemingly expecting me. "You heard," she said. Not a question. I handed her the development plan. "Hayes is determined, says it's already funded and approved." She flipped through the pages, expression growing darker. "They've tried before. In '88, again in '06. Each time accidents happened, equipment failures, inexplicable events that delayed work until funding dried up. And the warden retreated deeper each time. There used to be encounters much closer to the access roads. Now they only happen in the most remote areas." She closed the folder. "They're losing ground, inch by inch. What happens if Hayes succeeds this time?" Josephine's gaze turned toward the darkening forest. "Nothing good, for anyone." I spent a restless night weighing impossible options. By morning I'd made my decision. I couldn't stop the development directly, but I could ensure the survey team received a proper orientation to Wanagiska's special nature. The survey team arrived 3 days later. 2 engineers, a geologist, and an environmental assessment specialist. I volunteered to guide their preliminary exploration personally, suggesting we begin with the most challenging area, Ruby Creek Valley. As we hiked, I deliberately led them along paths I knew crossed territorial boundaries. I pointed out unusual formations, ancient trees, rare plant species, anything that might strengthen an environmental case against development. The specialist took notes, looking increasingly concerned about the project's impact. We made camp at the valley's edge, and as darkness fell, I quietly wandered away from the fire, into the trees, far enough to not be overheard, but close enough to find my way back. "I know you're watching." I spoke softly into the forest. "You've seen the markers they're leaving. You know what's coming." Silence answered me, but the familiar sensation of observation intensified. "I can't stop them alone," I continued. "But they need to understand. They need to know this isn't just land to be developed. They need to see." A low rumbling vocalization came from the darkness to my right. Acknowledgement, perhaps, or warning. "I'm not betraying your presence," I promised, "but they won't believe without experiencing something themselves." When I returned to camp, the mood had shifted. The team sat closer to the fire, voices hushed. They'd felt it too. The watchful presence, the weight of unseen eyes. That night, it began. Subtle at first, rocks clacking together in rhythmic patterns, too deliberate to be random. Heavy footsteps circling our camp just beyond the firelight. Brief glimpses of massive shadows moving between trees. By morning, the survey team was visibly shaken. The environmental specialist pulled me aside as we packed up. "This place," she said, voice low, "it feels different, important. My preliminary assessment will note significant concerns about disturbing the existing ecosystem." Throughout the day, the phenomena intensified. Equipment malfunctioned in specific areas. GPS readings jumped erratically. The geologist's samples disappeared from his pack when momentarily unattended. And the footprints massive, unmistakable impressions appearing in places we'd walked just hours before, sometimes forming complete circles around our survey markers. I maintained professional skepticism outwardly while guiding them deeper into increasingly uncomfortable experiences. By the 3rd day, they'd requested to cut the survey short. None would explicitly mention what they'd sensed, seen, or heard, but their field notes contained enough red flags to potentially halt development. The night before our return to headquarters, I left camp alone one final time. At the edge of a small clearing, I found what I was both hoping for and dreading: the warden waiting. In the moonlight, its massive form was fully visible for the first time. The breadth of its shoulders, the slope of its heavy brow, the intelligent eyes regarding me with unmistakable awareness. We stood regarding each other across 15 feet of open ground, neither advancing, neither retreating. A moment of recognition between guardians of different kinds. Slowly, deliberately, I removed my Forest Service badge and held it up, then placed it on a rock between us, a gesture whose meaning I hoped transcended species, an oath, a promise, a commitment to protection. The warden watched, motionless. Then, with surprising grace for its massive size, it bent and placed something beside my badge, a carved wooden figure, ancient and worn smooth by handling. A human form wearing what appeared to be a ranger's hat. Message received. We were not the first to stand this line. When I returned to camp, I found the survey team huddled together, awake despite the late hour. They'd heard something moving nearby, they said. Something large. "Probably just a bear," I offered, the familiar lie coming easily now. In the morning, we hiked out. At headquarters, the team delivered their initial assessment to Supervisor Hayes, citing dangerous terrain, fragile ecosystems, cultural significance to local tribes, and numerous logistical challenges. The development might still proceed, but it would face substantial delays and modifications. A month later, I received transfer orders, a lateral move to a more suitable assignment at a high-traffic national park. Hayes couldn't fire me outright, but he could remove me from Wanagiska. I submitted my resignation instead. My final night in the cabin, I packed my personal belongings but left something significant behind, my completed journal, containing everything I'd learned, placed precisely where Josephine would find it during the seasonal inventory. As dawn broke over Lake Ahote for the last time, I stood on my porch, watching the mist rise from the water. Movement at the forest edge caught my eye, a massive figure partially obscured by trees observing my departure. Beside it, a smaller shape, then another, a family group, watching. I raised my hand in farewell. The largest figure raised its arm in mirror response. Driving away, I glanced in my rearview mirror at the wilderness receding behind me. Wanagiska had changed me fundamentally. I'd come seeking isolation but found connection to something ancient and profound, a contract between species to protect what mattered. The forest would keep its secrets, and somewhere deep in those shadows, guardians would continue their endless patrol, protecting boundaries between worlds that grew thinner with each passing year. Some would call them monsters. Having walked their boundaries and glimpsed their purpose, I knew better. In the battle between development and preservation, between human expansion and ancient wisdom, I'd chosen my side. And as the road curved taking Wanagiska from my sight, I knew with certainty I would return someday. Guardians always do.